Chapter 20 of Jalna by Mazo de la Roche. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Atul Sharma, Winnipeg, Canada. Merry Gentlemen. Early in December, Augusta, Lady Buckley, came from England to visit her family. It would probably, unless her mother proposed to live forever, be the last Christmas the ancient lady would be on earth. At any rate, Augusta said in her letter, it would be the last visit to them in her own lifetime, for she felt herself too old to face the vagaries of ocean travel. She has said that on each of her last 3 visits, observed Nicholas. She makes as many farewells as Patty. I'll wager she lives to be as old as Mamma. Never, interrupted his mother angrily. Never! I won't have it. She'll never live to see 90. Augusta is a handsome woman, said Ernest. She is a dignity that is never seen now. I remember her as a dignified little thing when we were in shoulder knots. She always has an offended air, returned Nicholas. She looks as though something had offended her very deeply in early infancy, and she had never got over it. Mrs. Whiteoak cackled. That's true, Nick. It was on the voyage from India, when I was so sick. Your papa had to change her underthings, and he stuck her with a safety pin, poor brat. The brothers laughed callously, and each squeezed an arm of the old lady. She was such an entertaining old dear. They wondered what they should ever do without her. Life would never be the same when she was gone. They would realize then that they were old, but they would never quite realize it while she lived. They were taking her for her last walk of the season. This always occurred on a mild day in December. After that, she kept in the house till the first warm spring day. Peering out between the crimson curtains of her window, she would see something in the air that marked the day as one for her last walk. Now, she would exclaim, here goes for my last walk till spring. A thrill always ran through the house at this announcement. Gran's going for her last walk. Hello there. What do you suppose? Gran's off for her last toddle. Poor old dear. She invariably went as far as the wicket gate in the hedge beside the drive, a distance of perhaps 50 yards. They had arrived at the gate now, and she had put out her hands and laid them on the warm and friendly surface of it. They shook a good deal from the exertion, so that a tremor ran through her into the gate and was returned like a flash of secret recognition. Those 3 had stood together at that gate nearly 70 years before, when she was a lovely shouldered young woman with auburn ringlets, and they, 2 tiny boys in green velvet suits with embroidered cambric vests, and coxcombs of hair atop their heads. They stood leaning against the gate without speaking, filled for the moment with quaint recollections, enjoying the mild warmth of the sun on their backs. Then Ernest said, Shall we turn back, Mamma? Her head was cocked. No, I hear horses' hoofs. She does, by gad, said Nicholas. You've better ears than your sons, Mamma. Renny and Alayne were returning from a ride. Like soft thunder, the sound of their galloping swept along the drive. Then horses and riders appeared, the tall, bony grey mare and the bright chestnut, the long, drooping, grey-coated figure of the man, and the lightly poised, black-habited girl. Splendid, cried Nicholas. Isn't she doing well, Ernie? One would think she had ridden all her life. She's got a good mount, observed Renny, drawing in his horse and throwing a look of pride over the chestnut and his rider. Alayne's eyes were bright with exhilaration. In riding she had found something which all her life she had lacked, the perfect outdoor exercise. She had never been good at games, had never indeed cared for them, but she had taken to riding as a waterfowl to the pond. She had gained strength, physically and mentally. She had learned to love a gallop over frozen roads, against a bitter wind, as well as a canter in the temperate sun. Renny was a severe master. Nothing but a good seat and a seemly use of the good hands nature had given her satisfied him. But when at last she rode well, dashing along before him, bright wisps of hair blown from under her hat, her body light as a bird's against the wind, he was filled with a voluptuous hilarity of merely living. He could have galloped on and on behind her, swift and arrogant, to the end of the world. They rarely talked when they rode together. It was enough to be flying in unison along the lonely roads, with the lake gulls screaming and sweeping overhead. When they did speak, it was usually about the horses. He kept a sharp eye on her mount, and when he tightened a girth for her, or adjusted a stirrup, a look into her eyes said more than any words. Sometimes Eden and Pheasant and Pierce rode with them, and once they were joined by Maurice Vaughn, to Pheasant's childlike delight. It was on this occasion that Eden's horse slipped on the edge of a cliff above the lake, and would have taken him to the bottom had not Renny caught the bridle and dragged horse and rider to safety. He had pushed Pierce and Maurice aside to do this, as though with a fierce determination to save Eden himself. Did he covet the satisfaction, Alayne wondered afterward, of risking his life to save Eden's, to make up to him for winning the love of his wife? Or was it only the arrogant, protective gesture of the head of the family? Now, at any time, the bitterness of winter would descend on them. The rides would be few. "Watch me," cried grandmother. "I'm going back to the house now. This is my last walk till spring. Ha! My old legs feel wobbly. Hold me up, Nick. You're no more support than a feather bolster." The three figures shuffled along the walk, scarcely seeming to move. The horses dropped their heads and began to crop the dank grass of December. "You've no idea," said Renny, "how much the old lady and the two old boys mean to me." His grandmother had reached the steps. He waved his riding crop and shouted, "Well done! Bravo, Gran! Now you're safe till spring, eh? Tell them," wheezed Gran to Nicholas, "that when they put their nags away, they're to come and kiss me." "What does she say?" shouted Renny. Nicholas rumbled, "She wants to be kissed." When they had installed their mother in her favorite chair, he said in a heavy undertone to Ernest, "Those two were getting in deeper every day. Where's it going to end? Where are Eden's eyes? Oh, my dear Nick, you imagine it. You always were on the lookout for that sort of thing. I've seen nothing. Still, it's true that there is a feeling. Something in the air. But what can we do? I'd hate to interfere with an affair of Rennie's. Besides, Alayne is not that sort of girl. They're all that sort. Show me the woman who wouldn't enjoy a love affair with a man like Renny, especially if she were snatched up from a big city and hidden away in a sequestered hole like Jalna. I'd be tempted to have one myself if I could find a damsel decrepit enough to fancy me." Ernest regarded his brother with a tolerant smile. "Well, Nick, you have had affairs enough in your day. You and Millicent might be—" "For God's sake, don't say that," interrupted Nicholas. "I'd rather be dead than have that woman about me." "Ah, well," Ernest subsided. But he murmured something about a dash sight too many affairs. "Well, they're all over, aren't they?" Nicholas asked testily. "Ashes without a spark. I can't even remember their names. Did I ever kiss anyone in passion? I can't recall the sensation. What I am interested in is this case of Renny and Alayne. It's serious. He scarcely seems to notice her in the house." "Notice her? Oh, my dear man!" Nicholas bit off the top of a cigar and scornfully spat it out. "Well, for an instance, when the young Fennels were in the other night, and the gramophone was playing, Alayne danced oftener with them and Eden, and even young Finch, than with Renny. I only saw her dance with him once." Nicholas said pityingly, "My poor blind old brother. They only danced together once, because once was all they could stand of it. I saw them dancing in the hall. It was dim there. Her face had gone white, and her eyes, well, I don't believe they saw anything. He moved like a man in a dream. He'd a stiff smile on his face, as though he'd put it on for convenience. A mask. It's serious with him this time, and I don't like it. There will be a pretty row if Eden gets onto it." "Eden won't notice. He's too damn well wrapped up in himself. But I wonder Maggie hasn't." Ernest took up a newspaper and glanced at the date. The 17th. Just fancy. Augusta will arrive in Montreal tomorrow. I expect the poor thing has had a terrible passage. She always chooses such bad months for crossing. He wanted to change the subject. It upset his digestion to talk about the affairs of Renny and Alayne. Besides, he thought that Nicholas exaggerated the seriousness of it. They might be rather too interested in each other, but they were both too sensible to let the interest go to dangerous lengths. He looked forward to seeing Augusta. He and she had always been congenial. She arrived 2 days later. She had made the passage without undue discomfort, never indeed missing a meal, though most of the passengers had been very ill. She had become such a hardened traveller in her infancy that it lay almost beyond the power of the elements now to disarrange her. Lady Buckley was like a table set for an elaborate banquet at which the guests would never arrive. Her costume was intricate, elegant, with the elegance of a bygone day, unapproachable. No one would ever dare to rumple her with a healthy hug. Even old Mrs. Whiteoak held her in some awe, though behind her back she made ribald and derisive remarks about her. She resented Augusta's title, pretended that she could not recall it, and had always spoken to her acquaintances of my daughter, Lady Buntley, or Bunting, or Bantling. Augusta wore her hair in the dignified curled fringe of Queen Alexandra. It was scarcely grey, though whether through the kindness of nature or art was not known. She wore high collars fastened by handsome brooches. She had a long tapering waist and shapely hands and feet, the latter just showing beneath the hem of her rather full skirt. That air of having never recovered from some deep offence, of which Nicholas had spoken, was perhaps suggested by the poise of her head, which always seemed to be drawn back as though in recoil. She had strongly arched eyebrows, dark eyes become somewhat glassy from age, the court nose in a modified form, and a mouth that nothing could startle from its lines of complacent composure. She was an extremely well-preserved woman, who, though she was older than Nicholas or Ernest, looked many years younger. Since it was her fate to have been born in a colony, she was glad it had been India and not Canada. She thought of herself as absolutely English, refuting as an unhappy accident her mother's Irish birth. She was most favourably impressed by Alayne. She was pleased by a certain delicate sobriety of speech and bearing that Alayne had acquired from much association with her parents. "She is neither hoydenish nor pert, as so many modern girls are," she observed to her mother in her deep, well-modulated voice. "Got a good leg on her, too," returned the old lady, grinning. Lady Buckley and Alayne had long conversations together. The girl found beneath the remote exterior a kind and sympathetic nature. Lady Buckley was fond of all her nephews, but especially of the young boys. She would tell old-fashioned stories, some of them unexpectedly blood-curdling, to Wakefield by the hour. She would sit very upright beside Finch while he practiced his music lessons, composedly praising and criticizing, and the boy seemed to like her presence in the room. She endeared herself to Alayne by being kind to Pheasant. "Let us ignore her mother's birth," she said blandly. "Her father is of a fine old English military family, and if her parents were not married, while many of the nobility sprang from illegitimate stock, I quite like the child." It was soon evident that Meg resented her aunt's attitude toward Pierce's marriage, her admiration for Alayne, and her influence over Finch and Wakefield. She first showed her resentment by eating even less than formerly at the table. It would have been a marvel how she kept so sleek and plump had one not known of those tempting secret trays carried to her by Rags, who, if he were loyal and devoted to anyone on earth, was loyal and devoted to Miss Whiteoak. She then took to sitting a great deal with her grandmother, with the door shut against the rest of the family, and a blazing fire on the hearth. The old lady thrived on the scorching air and gossip. There was nothing she enjoyed more than hauling Augusta over the coals behind her back. To her face, she gave her a grudging respect. Since Augusta approved of Finch's music lessons, it was inevitable that his practicing should prove a torture to the old lady. "Gran simply cannot stand those terrible scales and chromatics," Meg said to Renny. "Just at the hour in the day when she usually feels her brightest, her nerves are set on edge. At her age, it's positively dangerous." "If the boy were taking lessons from Miss Pink," retorted Renny bitterly, "the practicing wouldn't disturb Gran in the least." "Why, Renny, Gran never objected to his taking from Mr. Rogers. It doesn't matter to her whom he takes from, though certainly Miss Pink would never have taught him to hammer as he insists on doing. No, she would have taught him to tinkle out little tunes with no more pep than a toy music box. If the youngster is musical, he's going to be properly taught. Alayne says he's very talented." The words were scarcely out before he knew he had made a fatal mistake in quoting Alayne's opinion. He saw Meg's face harden. He saw her lips curl in a cruel little smile. He floundered. "Oh well, anyone can see that he's got talent. I saw it long ago. That is why I chose Mr. Rogers." She made no reply for a moment, but still smiled, her soft blue eyes searching his. Then she said, "I don't think you realize, Renny, how strange your attitude toward Alayne is becoming. You have almost a possessive air. Sometimes I think it would be better if Eden had never brought her here. I've tried to like her, but—" "Oh my God," said Renny, wheeling and beginning to stride away. "You women make me sick. There's no peace with you. Imagine the entire family by the ears because of a kid's music lessons." He gave a savage laugh. Meg, watching him flounder, was aware of depths she had only half suspected. She said, "It's not that. It's not that. It's the feeling that there's something wrong, some sinister influence at work. From the day Eden brought the girl here, I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of something in her, something fatal and dangerous. First she wormed her way—" "Wormed her way? Oh, Maggie, for heaven's sake!" "Yes, she did. She literally wormed her way into the confidence of the uncles. Then she captivated poor Finch, just because she told him he was musical. He is willing to practice till he's worn out and Granny is ill. Then she turned Wake against me. He won't mind a thing I say. And now you, Renny. But this is dangerous. Different. Oh, I've seen it coming." He had recovered himself. "Maggie," he said, stifling her in a rough tweed hug, "if you would ever eat a decent meal, you know you literally starve yourself, and ever go out anywhere for a change, you wouldn't get such ideas into your head. They're not like you. You are so sane, so well balanced. None of us has as sound a head as you. I depend on you in every way. You know that." She collapsed, weeping on his shoulder, overwhelmed by this primitive masculine appeal. But she was not convinced. Her sluggish nature was roused to activity against the machinations of Alayne and Lady Buckley. That evening, when Finch went to the drawing-room to practice, he found the door locked. He sought Renny in the harness room of the stable. "Look here," Finch burst out, almost crying. "What do you suppose? They've gone and locked me out. I can't practice my lesson. They've been after me for a week about it, and now I'm locked out." Renny, pipe in mouth, continued to gaze in whole-souled admiration of a new russet saddle. "Renny," bawled Finch, "don't you hear? They've locked me out of the drawing-room, and I met Rags in the hall, and he gave me one of his beastly grins and said, 'Ow, Miss Whiteoak has locked up that pianner. She's not going to have any pianner playing in the house till the old lady's recovered. She's in a pretty bad way, she is, with all your rattly banging. I'd like to know what I'm to do. I may as well throw the whole thing up if I'm not allowed to practice." Renny made sympathetic noises against the stem of his pipe and continued to gaze at the saddle. Finch drove his hands into his pockets and slumped against the door jamb. He felt calmer now. Renny would do something, he was sure, but he dreaded a row with himself the center of it. At last, the elder Whiteoak spoke. "I'll tell you what I'll do, Finch. I'll ask Vaughn if you may practice on his piano. I'm sure he wouldn't mind. The housekeeper's deaf, so her nerves won't be upset. I'll have the piano tuned. It used to be a good one. Then you'll be quite independent." Soon young Finch might be seen plunging through the ravine on the dark December afternoons to the shabby, unused drawing-room at Vaughanlands. He brought new life to the old piano, and it, like land that had lain fallow for many years, responded joyfully to his labor, and sent up a stormy harvest of sound that shook the prism chandelier. Often he was late for the evening meal, and would take what he could get in the kitchen from Mrs. Ragg. Several times Maurice Vaughn asked him to have his supper with him, and Finch felt very much a man, sitting opposite Maurice with a glass of beer beside him, and no question about his smoking. Maurice always managed to bring the conversation around to Maggie. It was difficult for Finch to find anything pleasant to tell about her in these days, but he discovered that Maurice was even more interested to hear of her cantankerousness than her sweetness. It seemed to give him a certain glum satisfaction to know that things were at 6s and 7s with her. Finch had not been so happy since he was a very little fellow. He had perhaps never been so happy. He discovered in himself a yearning for perfection in the interpretation of his simple musical exercises. which he never had in his Latin translations or his maths. He discovered that he had a voice. All the way home through the black ravine he would sing, sometimes at the top of his lungs, sometimes in a tender, melancholy undertone. But how his schoolwork suffered. His report at the end of the term was appalling. As Eden said, he outfinched himself. In the storm that followed, his one consolation was that a large share of the blame was hurled at Renny. However, that did him little good in the end, for Renny turned on him, cursing him for a young shirker, and threatening to stop the lessons altogether. Aunt Augusta and Alayne stood by him, but with caution. Augusta did not want her visit to become too unpleasant, and Alayne had come to regard her position in the house as a voyager making his difficult progress among treacherous rocks and raging rapids. She could endure it till the new year, when Eden was to take a position in town which Mr. Evans had got for him, and no longer. At this moment, when Finch, a naked wretch at the cart's tail, with fingers of scorn pointing at him from all directions, alternately contemplated running away and suicide, he suddenly ceased to be an object of more than passing scorn, and little Wakefield took the center of the stage. Pierce had for some time been missing cartridges. Wake had for an equal length of time seemed to have an unlimited supply of marshmallows, and the sneaking stable boy had split, and it was discovered that Wake was emptying the cartridges, making neat little packets of the gunpowder, and selling it to the village boys for their own peculiar violences. When cornered, Wake had denied all knowledge of gunpowder, whether in cartridges or bulk, but Meg and Pierce, searching his little desk, had come upon the neat little packets, all ready to sell, with a box full of coppers, and even a carefully written account of sales and payments. It was serious. Meg said he must be whipped. The young Whiteoaks had set no high standard of morality for a little brother to live up to, but still this was too bad. "Flog him well," said Gran. "The court stole, but they never lied about it." "The Whiteoaks," said Nicholas, "often lied, but they never stole." Ernest murmured, "Wakefield seems to combine the vices of both sides." "He's a little rotter," said Pierce, "and has got to be taken out of him." Alayne was aghast at the thought of the airy and gentle Wake being subjected to the indignity of physical punishment. "Oh, couldn't he please get off this time?" she begged. "I'm sure he'll never do such a thing again." Pierce gave a short, scornful laugh. "The trouble with that kid is he's been utterly ruined. If you'll let me attend to him, I'll wager he doesn't pinch anything more." "I strongly disapprove of a delicate child like Wakefield being made to suffer," said Lady Buckley. The culprit, listening in the hall, put his head between the curtains at this, and showed his little white, tear-stained face. "Go away, sir," said Nicholas. "We're discussing you." "Please, please." Renny, who had been captured for the conclave and who stood gloomily, cap in hand, with snow-crusted leggings, turned to go. "Well, I'm off." "Renny," cried his sister peremptorily, "why are you going? You have got to whip Wake." The opposition of Alayne and Augusta had turned her sisterly anxiety to correct the child into relentless obstinacy. Renny stood with bent head, looking sulkily into his cap. "The last time I licked him, he shivered and cried half the night. I'll not do it again." And he turned into the hall, pushing Wakefield aside and slamming the front door behind him. "Well, of all the damn sloppiness," broke out Pierce. "Don't worry," said Meg, rising. "Wakefield shall be punished." Her immobile, sweet face was a shade paler than usual. "This isn't a woman's job," declared Pierce. "I'll do it." "No, you'll be too hard on him." "Let me flog the boy," cried Grandmother. "I flogged boys before now. I flogged Augusta, haven't I, Augusta? Get me my stick." Her face purpled with excitement. "Mamma, Mamma," implored Ernest. "This is very bad for you." "Fan her," said Nicholas. "She's a terrible color." Meg led Wakefield up the stairs. Pierce, following her to the foot, entreated, "Now, for heaven's sake, don't get chicken-hearted. If you're going to do it thoroughly." "Oh, don't you wish it were you?" exclaimed Pheasant, tugging at his arm. "Which?" he laughed. "Giving or getting one?" "Getting, of course. It would do you good." Nicholas and Ernest also came into the hall, and after them shuffled Grandmother, so exhilarated that she walked alone, thumping her stick on the floor and muttering, "I flogged boys before now." Finch draped himself against the newel post and thought of thrashings of his own. Augusta and Alayne shut themselves in the living room. Eden came out of his room above to discover the cause of the disturbance, but Meg would not speak. With set face, she pushed Wakefield before her into her room and closed the door. However, Pierce, in vehement tones, sketched the recent criminal career of the youngest Whiteoak. Eden perched on the handrail, gazing down at the faces of his brothers, uncles, and grandmother with delight. He said, dangling a leg, "You're priceless. It's worth being interrupted in the very heart of a tropic poem to see your faces down there. You're like paintings by the great masters. Old woman with stick. The cronies. That's Uncle Nick and Uncle Ernest. Young man with red face. You, Pierce. Village idiot. You, Finch. As a matter of fact, I was at my wit's end for a rhyme. Perhaps Brother Wake in his anguish will supply me with one." "What's he saying?" asked Gran. "I won't have any of his back chat." Ernest replied mildly, "He's just saying that we look as pretty as pictures, Mama." "She's beginning at last," announced Pierce, grinning. A sound of sharp blows cascaded from Meg's room, blows that carried the tingling impact of bare skin, staccato feminine blows that ceased as suddenly as they had begun. "He's not crying, poor little beggar," said Eden. "That's because he's not hurt," stormed Pierce. "What does the woman think she's doing? Giving love taps to a kitten? Good Lord, she'd hardly begun till she'd stopped. Hi, Maggie, what's the matter? Aren't you going to lick the kid?" Meg appeared at the door of her room. "I have whipped him. What do you want me to do?" "You don't mean to say that you call that a licking? Better not touch him at all. It's a joke." "Yes," agreed Nicholas. "If you're going to tan a boy, do it thoroughly." Grandmother said, her foot on the bottom step. "I'd do it thoroughly. Let me at him." "Steady on, Mama," said Nicholas. "You can't climb up there." "For God's sake, Maggie," exclaimed Pierce, "go back and give him something he'll remember for more than 5 minutes." Yes, Maggie," said Ernest. "A little swishing like that is worse than nothing." "Give him a real one. Give him a real one," bawled Finch, suddenly stirred to ferocity. He had suffered, by God. Let that pampered little Wake suffer for a change. Boney screamed, "Jabe Katra! Namakaram! Chur!" Meg swept to the top of the stairs. "You are like a pack of wolves," she said at white heat, "howling for the blood of one poor little lamb. Wake is not going to get one more stroke, so you may as well go back to your lairs." Eden threw his arms about her and laid his head on her comfortable shoulder. "How I love my family," he exclaimed. "To think that after New Year I shall be out of it all. Miss such lovely scenes as this." Meg did not try to understand Eden. She knew that he was pleased with her because he hugged her, and that was enough. "Do you blame me for telling just how heartless I thought they were?" "You were perfectly right, old girl." "Eden, I hope you won't mind what I'm going to say, but I do wish Alayne would not interfere between me and the children. She has such ideas." "Oh, she has the habit of wanting to set everything right. She's the same with me, always telling me how unmethodical I am, and how untidy with my things. She means well enough. It's just her little professorial ways." "Poor lamb," said Maggie, stroking the shining casque of his hair. Wake's voice came broken by sobs. "Maggie!" Meg disengaged herself from Eden's arms. "There now, I must go to him and tell him he's forgiven." The party downstairs had retreated after Maggie's attack, leaving a trail of wrangling behind them. Pierce reached for his cap, and, stooping at the door of his grandmother's room, said, loud enough for Alayne to hear, "They're spoiling the 2 kids among them anyway. As for Eden, he's no better than another woman." "He's like his poor flibberty-gibbet mother," said Gran. The cloud under which Wakefield awoke next morning was no more than a light mist, soon dispelled by the sun of returning favor. Before the day was over, he was his own dignified, airy, and graceless self again, a little subdued perhaps, a little more anxious to please, a shade more subtle in the game of his life. The game of life went on at Jalna, a stubborn, heavy game, requiring not so much agility of mind as staying power and a thick skin. The old red house, behind the shelter of spruce and balsam, drew into itself as the winter settled in. It became the center of whirling snow flurries. Later on, its roof, its gables, and all its lesser projections became bearers of a weight of slumberous, unspotted snow. It was guarded by snow trees. It was walled by a snow hedge. It was decked, festooned, titivated by snow wreaths, garlands, and downy flakes. The sky leaned down toward it. The frozen earth pressed under it. Its habitants were cut off from the rest of the world. Except for occasional tracks in the snow, there was little sign of their existence. Only at night, dim lights showed through the windows, not illuminating the rooms, but indicating by their mysterious glow that human beings were living, loving, suffering, desiring beneath that roof. Christmas came. Books for Alayne from New York, with a chastely engraved card enclosed from Mr. Corey. More books and a little framed etching from the aunts up the Hudson. An overblouse in which she would have frozen at Jalna, from Rosamond Trent. Alayne carried them about, showing them, and then laid them away. They seemed unreal. There were no holly wreaths at Jalna, no great red satin bows, but the banister was twined with evergreens, and a sprig of mistletoe was suspended from the hanging lamp in the hall. In the drawing-room, a great Christmas tree towered above the ceiling, bristling with the strange fruit of presents for the family, from grandmother down to little Wake. A rich hilarity drew them all together that day. They loved the sound of each other's voices. They laughed on the least provocation. By evening, the young men showed a tendency toward horseplay. There was a late dinner, dominated by the largest turkey Alayne had ever seen. There was a black and succulent plum pudding with brandy sauce. There were native sherry and port. The Fennels were there, the two daughters of the retired admiral and lonely little Miss Pink, the organist. Mr. Fennel proposed grandmother's health, in a toast so glowing with metaphor and prickling with wit that she suggested that if he were 3 sheets in the wind on Sunday, he would preach a sermon worth hearing. The admiral's daughters and Miss Pink were flushed and steadily smiling in the tranced gaiety induced by wine. Meg was soft and dimpled as a young girl. A great platter of raisins smothered in flaming brandy was carried in by Rags, wearing the exalted air of an acolyte. Seeing Rags' hard face in that strange light carried Renny, as in a dream, to another very different scene. He saw Rags bent over a saucepan in a dugout in France, wearing a filthy uniform, and oddly enough that same expression. But why, he could not remember. He had picked Rags up in France. Renny looked up into his eyes with a smile, and a queer, worshipping grin spread over Rags' grim, hard-bitten face. The raisins were placed on the table in the midst of the company. Tortured blue flames leaped above them, quivering, writhing, and at last dying into quick-running ripples. Hands, burnished like brass, stretched out to snatch the raisins. Wakes, with his round child's wrist. Finches, bony and predatory. Pierce, thick, muscular. Grandmother's, dark, its hook-like fingers glittering with jewels. All the grasping, eager hands and the watchful faces behind them illuminated by the flare. Grand's eyes like coals beneath her beetling red brows. Pheasant's hands fluttered like little brown birds. She was afraid of getting burned. Again and again the blue flames licked them and they darted back. "You are a little silly," said Renny. "Make a dash for them, or they'll be gone." She set her teeth and plunged her hand into the flame. Oh, I'm going to be burned." "You've only captured 2, laughed Eden on her other side, and laid a glossy cluster on her plate. Renny saw Eden's hand slide under the table and cover hers in her lap. His eyes sought Eden's and held them a moment. They gazed with narrowed lids, each seeing something in the other that startled him. Scarcely was this unrecognized something seen when it was gone, as a film of vapor that changes for a moment the clarity of the well-known landscape and shows a scene obscure, even sinister. The shadow passed and they smiled, and Eden withdrew his hand. Under the mistletoe, Mr. Fennel, grandmother having been carefully steered that way by 2 grandsons, caught and kissed her, his beard rough, her cap askew. Uncle Ernest, a merry gentleman that night, caught and kissed Miss Pink, who most violently became Miss Scarlet. Tom Fennel caught and kissed Pheasant. "Here now, Tom, you fathead, cut that out," from Pierce. Finch, seeing everything double after 2 glasses of wine, caught and kissed 2 white-shouldered Alaynes. It was the first time she had worn an evening dress since her marriage. Nicholas growled at Ernest. "Did you ever see a hungry wolf? Look at Renny glowering in that corner. Isn't Alayne lovely tonight?" "Everything's lovely," said Ernest, rocking on his toes. "Such a nice Christmas." They played charades and dumb crambo. To see grandmother, inadvertently shouting out the name of the syllable she was acting, as Queen Victoria, and Mr. Fennel as Gladstone. To see Meg as Mary Queen of Scots, with Renny as executioner, all but cutting off her head with the knife with which he had carved the turkey. To see Alayne as the Statue of Liberty, holding a bedroom lamp on high. "Look out, Alayne, don't tilt it so, you'll have the house on fire." And Finch as a hungry immigrant. You saw the family of Jalna at their happiness and exuberant play. Even when the guests were gone and the Whiteoaks getting ready for bed, they could not settle down. Ernest, in shirt and trousers, prowled through the dim hallway, a pillow from his bed in one hand. He stopped at Rennie's door. It was ajar. He could see Rennie winding his watch, Wake sitting up in bed, chattering excitedly. Ernest hurled the pillow at Rennie's head. He staggered, bewildered by the unexpected blow, and dropped his watch. "By Judas," he said, "if I get you—" With his pillow he started in pursuit. "A pillow fight! A pillow fight!" cried Wake, and scrambled out of bed. Ernest had got as far as his brother's room. "Nick," he shouted in great fear, "save me!" Nicholas, his grey mane on end, was up and into it. Pierce, like a bullet, sped down the hall. Finch, dragged from slumber, had barely reached the scene of conflict when a backhanded blow from Eden's pillow laid him prostrate. Nicholas' room was a wreck. Up and down the passage the combatants surged. The young men forgot their loves, their fears, their jealousies. The 2 elderly men their years, in the ecstasy of physical, half-naked conflict. "Boys, boys," cried Meg, drawing aside her chenille curtain. "Steady on, old lady," and a flying pillow drove her into retreat. Pheasant appeared at her door, her short hair all on end. "May I play too?" she cried, hopping up and down. "Back to your hole, little hedgehog," said Renny, giving her a feathery thump as he passed. He was after Nicholas, who had suddenly become cognizant of his gout and could scarcely hobble. Pierce and Finch were after him. They cornered him, and Nicholas, from being the well-nigh exhausted quarry, became the aggressor and helped to belabor him. Eden stood at the top of the stairs, laughingly holding off little Wake, who was manfully wielding a long, old-fashioned bolster. Ernest, with one last hilarious fling in him, stole forth from his room and hurled a solid sofa cushion at the pair. It struck Eden on the chest. He backed. He missed his footing. He fell. Down the stairs he went, crashing with a noise that aroused grandmother, who began to rap the floor with her stick. "What's up? What have you done?" asked Renny. "My God, I've knocked the lad downstairs. What if I've killed him?" The brothers streamed helter-skelter down the stairs. "Oh, those stairs," groaned Eden. "I've twisted my leg. I can't get up." "Don't move, old fellow." They began to feel him all over. The women emerged from their rooms. "I have been expecting an accident," said Augusta, looking more offended than usual. "Oh, whatever is the matter?" cried Alayne. Ernest answered, wringing his hands. "Can you ever forgive me, Alayne? Pierce says I've broken Eden's leg." End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Jalna by Mazo de la Roche. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Atul Sharma, Winnipeg, Canada. Eden and Pheasant. 6 weeks had passed, and Eden was still unable to leave his room. As well as a broken leg, he had got a badly wrenched back. However, after the first suffering was over, he had not had such a bad time. It was almost with regret that he heard the hearty, red-faced doctor say that morning that he would soon be as fit as ever. It had been rather jolly lying there, being taken care of, listening to the complaints of others about the severity of the weather, the depth of the snowdrifts, and the impossibility of getting anywhere with the car. The inactivity of body had seemed to generate a corresponding activity of mind. Never had he composed with less effort. Poetry flowed through him in an exuberant crystal stream. Alayne had sat by his couch and written the first poems out for him in her beautifully legible hand. But now he was able to sit up with a pad on his knee and scrawl them in his own way, decorating the margins with fanciful sketches and illustration. Alayne had been a dear through it all. She had nursed him herself, fetching and carrying from the basement kitchen to their room without complaint, though he knew he had been hard to wait on in those first weeks. She looked abominably tired. Those brick basement stairs were no joke. Her face seemed to have grown broader, flatter, with a kind of Teutonic patience in it that made him remember her mother had been of Dutch extraction several generations ago. It was there, the look of solidity and patience, a benevolent, tolerant face it might become in later life, but plainer certainly. She must have been disappointed too, as his inability to take the position got for him by Mr. Evans at the New Year. Though she had not said much about it, he knew that she was eager to leave Jalna and have a house of their own. He had refused to let her put her money into the buying of one, but he had agreed that, he paying the rent from his salary, she might buy the furniture. She had talked a good deal about just how she would furnish it. When his leg was paining and he could not sleep, it was one of her favorite ways of soothing him, to stroke his head and furnish each of the rooms in turn. She had chosen the furniture for his workroom with great care, and also that for his bedroom, and hers. He had been slightly aggrieved that she spoke of separate rooms, though upon reflection he had decided that it would be rather pleasant to be able to scatter his belongings all over his room without the feeling that he was seriously disturbing her. She was too serious, that was a fact. She had a way of making him feel like a naughty boy. That had been charming at first, but often now it irritated him. There was something strange about her of late, remote, inward-gazing. He hoped and prayed she wasn't going to be mopey. A mopey wife would be disastrous to him, weigh on his spirits most dreadfully. She had slept on the couch in their room during the first weeks after the accident, when he had needed a good deal of waiting on at night. Later, she had taken all her things and moved to a big low-ceiled room in the attic. She spent hours of her time there now. Of course, all he had to do was ring the little silver bell at his side, and she came flying down the stairs to him. But he could not help wondering what she did up there all alone. Not that he wanted her with him continually, but he could not forgive her for seeking solitude. He was really very happy. He was well, except for a not unpleasant feeling of lassitude. He had also a feeling of exquisite irresponsibility and irrelevance. This interval in his life he accepted as a gift from the gods. It was a time of inner development, of freedom of spirit, of ease from the shackles of life. He had scarcely felt the chafing of those shackles yet, and he did not want to feel them. He should have been a lone unicorn, stamping in inconsequent gaiety over sultry southern plains, leaving bonds to tamer spirits. He was just thinking this, and smiling at the thought, when Pheasant came into the room. She was carrying a plate of little red apples, and she wore the vivid smock bought for her by Alayne. "Maggie sent you those," she said, setting the plate beside him. "As a matter of fact, I think you eat too much. You're not as slim as you were." "Well, it's a wonder I'm not thin," he returned with some heat. "God knows I've suffered." He bit into an apple and continued, "You've never had any real sympathy for me, Pheasant." She looked at him astonished. "Why, I thought I'd been lovely to you. I sat with you and listened to your old poetry and told you what a wonder you are. What more do you want?" He reclined, drumming his fingers on the afghan that lay over him, a faint smile shadowing rather than lighting his face. She examined his features and then said darkly, "You're too clever. That's what's the matter with you. My dear little Pheasant, don't call me by such a horrid word. I'm not clever. I'm only natural. You're natural. That's why we get on so famously." "We don't get on," she returned indignantly. "Uncle Ernest was saying only the other day what a pity it is you and I quarrel so much." "He's an old ninny." "You ought to be ashamed to say that. He does everything in his power to make up to you for hurting you. He has read to you by the hour. I don't think he'll ever get over the shock of seeing you hurtle downstairs with his pillow on top of you." "I agree with you. It was the most exhilarating thing that has happened to him for years. He looks 10 years younger, to have knocked an athletic young fellow downstairs and broken his leg, just when he began to feel the feebleness of old age creeping on. Why, he's like a young cockerel that saluted the dawn with its first crow. I think you're sardonic, and I think you're delicious. I especially admire your wisdom and that little tuft of hair that stands up on your crown, but I do wish you'd put it down. It excites me." She passed her hand over it. "Do you know," he said, "that you pass your hand over your head exactly as I do? We have several identical gestures. I believe our gesture toward life is the same." "I think your greatest gift," she said stiffly, "is flattery. You know just how to make a woman pleased with herself." She was such a ridiculous little child, playing at being grown up, that he could scarcely keep from laughing at her. Neither could he keep the tormenting image of her from his mind when she was away from him. He lay back on the pillow and closed his eyes. Outside, the snow-covered lawns and fields, unmarked by the track of a human being, stretched in burnished rosy whiteness toward the sunset. The pines and hemlocks, clothed in the somber grandeur of their winter foliage through shadows of an intense, translucent blueness. And in the hard, bright intensity of that northern ether, every smallest twig was bitten against its background as though with acid. An atmosphere hateful to those who see it in alien loneliness, but of the essence and goodness of life to the native born. When Eden opened his eyes and turned toward her, she was looking out on this scene. He thought there was a frightened look in her eyes. A faint sound of music came from Uncle Nick's room. He was playing his piano, as he often did at this hour. "Pheasant?" "Yes." "You look odd, rather frightened." "I'm not a bit frightened. Not of me, of course, but of yourself. Yes, I am rather frightened of myself, and I don't even know why. I believe it's that wild-looking sky. In a minute it will be dark and so cold. You'll need a fire here." "I am on fire, Pheasant." He found her hand and held it. He asked, "Do you think Alayne loves me any more?" "No, I don't think she does. And you don't deserve it. Her love, I mean. I don't believe I ever had it. It was my poetry she loved, not me. Do you think she loves Renny?" She stared at him, startled. "I never thought of that. Perhaps she does. A nice mix-up. Well, I should not blame Alayne. Here she is pitchforked into this weird family, with a husband who is absolutely devoted to himself, and a most remarkable-looking and affectionate brother-in-law. Remarkable-looking and affectionate? Heavens, what a description! I think it's a very good description. Well, I suppose Renny is remarkable. But affectionate? That scarcely describes making love to another man's wife. I don't believe Alayne would fall for him unless he did make love to her. But affectionate? I can't get over that. How would you describe your holding my hand? That's affectionate, isn't it?" He took her other hand and laid both hands on his breast. "I shan't mind about anything," he said, "if you will only care for me." He drew her closer, his face stained by the afterglow that transformed the matter-of-fact room into a strange and passionate retreat. Pheasant began to cry. "Don't," she implored. "Don't do that. It's what I've been afraid of." "You care for me," he whispered. "Oh, my darling little Pheasant, say that you do, just once. Kiss me then. You know you want to. It's what you've been dreading, but desiring too, my dearest. There's nothing to be afraid of in life, nothing to be ashamed of. Just be your precious self." She flung herself against him, sobbing. She did not know whether or not she loved him, but she knew that the room had a sultry fascination for her, that the couch where Eden lay was the center of all her waking thoughts, that his eyes, blazing in the afterglow, compelled her to do as he willed. She hated Pierce for being absorbed in his cattle, seeing nothing of her temptation, not saving her from herself, as he should have done. He knew that she was not like other young girls of his class. She had bad, loose blood. He should have watched her, been hard with her as Maurice had been. His idea was to make a pal of his wife, but she was not that sort of wife. He should have known. Oh, he should have known, saved her from herself, from Eden. As she wept against Eden's shoulder, her tears became no longer the warm tears of surrender, but the tears of black anger against Pierce, who had not saved her. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Jalna by Mazo de la Roche. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Atul Sharma, Winnipeg, Canada. Wakefield's birthday. Wakefield awoke each morning now with a feeling of gay excitement. The reason for this was that Finch had given him his Boy Scout bugle. Finch had got over being a Boy Scout very quickly. The only thing about it that had suited him was the fact of his being a bugler. However, he soon tired of that, and coming to the conclusion that he was not the stuff of which good Boy Scouts are made, he gave it up entirely. To perform his little duties with bright alertness, to be ready, to be helpful, to do a kind act every day, seemed beyond him. So he had skulked out of the organization and locked his bugle in the under part of the secretary in his room, where Wake might not meddle with it. Now he had given it to Wake for his birthday. Having once decided to do this, he did not hold it till the day itself. The little boy had been in possession of it for a fortnight, and every morning he wakened with his nerves tingling with delicious excitement, for there, at the head of the bed, was the bugle, and he must not get up until he had sounded the reveille. It was thrilling to sit up in bed and send forth from swelling chest and distended cheeks those glorious brazen tones. Feeble, croaking they might sound to the listener, but to Wake they were round with noble roundness and stirring to the soul. Luckily, he was usually the last of the family to awake, but this morning was his birthday, and he had been the very first. All had been roused by that sleep-shattering reveille. Renny, stretched on his back, his arms flung above his head, had been dreaming of galloping on a great wild horse along a steep precipice. Suddenly, with a neigh that shook the universe, the horse had leaped over the precipice and plunged with him into the sunlit sea. With a convulsive twitch of the body, Renny awoke into the sunlight of the early morning, his face so comic in its astonishment that Wakefield laughed aloud, lost his wind, and spluttered helplessly into the instrument. Then Renny laughed too, for the sight of his young brother sitting up in bed, so alert, so important, with hair on end and one dark eye cocked roguishly at him above one bulging cheek, was so ridiculous. He was ridiculous, and he was pathetic too. Poor little beggar, thought Renny. A human being like myself, who will have a man's feelings, a man's queer thoughts one day. "It's my birthday," quoth Wakefield, wiping his chin. "Many happy returns," said Renny, trying not to look as though he had a delightful present for him. "I shall probably not live to be as old as Gran, but I may reach 90 if I have good care." "Oh, you'll get good care, all right. Cuddle down here a bit. It's early yet." Wake laid the bugle on the table at the head of the bed, and flung himself down into the bedclothes. He burrowed against Renny, putting his arms about his neck. "Oh, I'm so happy," he breathed. "A picnic today, if you please. The first of the season. It's June, the 1st of June, my birthday." His eyes were two narrow slits. "Renny, have you you know what?" Renny yawned prodigiously, showing 2 rows of strong teeth. "Well, I guess I'll get up." "Renny! Renny!" He bumped and struggled against his elder's chest. "Oh, Renny, I could kill you." "Why?" "'Cause you won't tell me." "Tell you what?" Renny held him as in a vice. "You know what." "How can I know if you won't tell me?" "Oh, you beast, Renny. It's you who won't tell me." "Tell you what?" "Whether you have a you-know-what for me." Renny closed his eyes. "You sound half-witted this morning," he said coldly. "It seems a pity when you've reached such an age." Wakefield examined his brother's hard, weather-bitten visage with its relentless-looking nose. Certainly it was a forbidding face, a face that belonged to a man who was his adored brother and who had no birthday present for him. He too closed his eyes, murmuring to himself, "Oh, this is terrible." A tear trickled down his cheek and fell on Rennie's wrist. The elder Whiteoak gave the younger a little shake. "Cut that out," he said. They looked into each other's eyes. "It nearly broke me." "What did, Rennie?" "Why, the present." "The present?" "Rather, the birthday present." "Oh, Rennie, for God's sake—" "Stop your swearing." "But what is it?" It's, he plunged the word into Wake's ear, a pony, a beautiful Welsh pony. After the first ecstatic questions, Wake lay silent, floating in a golden haze of happiness. He did not want to miss the savor of one lovely moment of this day of days. First a pony, then a picnic, and in between an orgy of other presents. A birthday cake with 10 tall candles. At last he whispered, "Is it a he or a she?" "A little mare." A mare. He could hardly believe it. There would be colts, tiny shaggy colts, his very own. It was almost too much. He wriggled against Renny, adoring him. "When will she... Oh, I say, Renny, what's her name?" "She has no name. You may name her." No name. A nameless gift from the gods. Oh, responsibility overpowering. To name her. "When will she come?" "She is here, in the stable." With a squeal of joy, Wake leaped up in the bed. Then, espying the bugle, he had an inspiration. "Renny, wouldn't it be splendid if I'd sound the reveille and then we both instantly get up? I'd like terribly to sound the reveille for you, Renny." "Fire away, then." Solemnly, the boy placed the bugle against his lips and took a prodigious breath. Renny lay looking at him, amused and compassionate. Poor little devil, a man some day, like himself. Loudly, triumphantly, the notes of the reveille were sounded. Simultaneously, they sprang out onto the floor. June sunshine blazed into the room. Downstairs, Wakefield said to Finch, "What do you suppose? Renny has given me a pony. We've just been out of the stable to see her. A little pony mare, mind you, Finch. There'll be colts one day. And thanks again for the bugle. Renny and I both got up by it this morning. And there's to be a picnic on the shore, and an absolutely enormous birthday cake." Grunted Finch. "I never remember such a fuss on any of my birthdays." "You have always had a cake, dear," said Maggie, reproachfully. "And don't forget that nice little engine thing, and your bicycle, and your wristwatch." "You don't expect the family to rejoice because you were born, do you?" asked Pierce, grinning. "No, I don't expect anything," bawled Finch, "but to be badgered." "Poor little boy, he's jealous." Pierce passed a sunburned hand over Finch's head, stroking downward over his long nose, and ending with a playful jolt under the chin. Finch's nerves were raw that morning. He was in the midst of the end-of-the-term examinations, and his increasing preoccupation with music seemed to render him less than ever able to cope with mathematics. He knew with dreadful certainty that he was not going to pass into the next form. The fact that his music teacher was not only pleased with him, but deeply interested in him, would not make up for that. Combined with a skulking sense of helpless inferiority, he felt the exalted arrogance of one whose spirit moves on occasion in the free and boundless spaces of art. With a kind of bellow, he turned on Pierce and struck him in the chest. Pierce caught his wrists and held them, smiling lazily into his wild, distorted face. "See here, Eden," he called. "This little lamb is buying because we celebrate Wake's birthday with more pep than we do his. Isn't it a crime?" Eden lounged over, his lips drawn in a faint smile from his teeth which held a cigarette, and joined in the baiting. All morning Finch's heart raged within him. At dinner, Maggie and her grandmother both chose to correct him, to nag at him. He slouched, they said. He stuck his elbows out. He bolted his food so that he might be ready for the last helping of cherry tart before poor dear Gran. Furious, he muttered something to himself to the effect that she might have it for all he cared, and that if it choked her... She heard. "Renny! Renny!" she shouted, turning purple. "He says he hopes it chokes me at my age. Flog him, Renny. I won't stand it. I'll choke, I know I will." She glared wildly at the head of the house, her eyes blazing under her shaggy red brows. "Mamma, Mamma," said Ernest. "It's true," growled Nicholas. "I heard him say it." Renny had been talking to Alayne, trying not to notice the disturbance. Now, in sudden anger, he got up and in a stride stood over Finch. "Apologize to Gran," he ordered. "Sorry," muttered Finch, turning white. "No mumbling. Properly." "I'm very sorry, grandmother." The sight of his hunched shoulders and unprepossessing sheepish face suddenly threw his elder into one of his quick passions. He gave him a sound and ringing cuff. Perhaps it was because Finch was not properly balanced that day. In any case, it always seemed easy to send him sprawling. The next second, he was in a sobbing heap on the floor, and his heavy chair had fallen with a crash. Alayne smothered a cry and stared at her plate. Her heart was thudding, but she thought, I must hang on to myself. I must. He didn't mean to do it. He will be sorry. They drove him to it. Renny sat down. He avoided looking at her. He was humiliated at having been drawn into violence before her. However, if she thought him a brute, so much the better. Finch gathered up himself in his chair and resumed his place at the table with a look of utter dejection. Now will you give me back, Chat? Asked grandmother, and she added after another mouthful of tart, Somebody kiss me. She kept asking what time the picnic was to be, for she was even more excited about it than Wake. She had her bonnet and cape on long before the hour when the phaeton was to convey her to the shore. She had the picnic hampers ranged beside her chair, and passed the period of waiting by a prolonged and bitter discussion with Boney as to whether or not he should forage among the edibles. The picnic party was separated into the same parts as the church party, with the difference that Finch rode his bicycle instead of walking, and Pierce arrived late on horseback, for it was a busy season with him. As he tethered his mare to an iron stake which had been driven into that field before any of them could remember, he glanced towards the picnickers to see where Pheasant was. He had not had so much of her company of late as he would have liked. To the regular spring work of his men and himself had been added the setting out of a new cherry orchard and the clearing of a piece of woodland for cultivation. Pierce was as strong and wholesome as a vigorous young tree. He was ambitious and he was not afraid of work, but it did seem rather hard that he had so little time to spare in these lovely days of early summer for happy and indolent hours with Pheasant. She seldom came out into the fields or orchards with him now, as she used to do. She looked pale, too, and was often petulant, even depressed. He wondered if she were possibly going to have a child. He must take good care of her, give her a little change of some kind. Perhaps he could arrange a motor trip over the weekend. The poor girl was probably envious of Alayne, who had Eden always at her side. He saw Pheasant standing on a bluff, her slender figure outlined against the sky. Her short green dress was fluttering about her knees. She looked like a flower poised there, above the breezy blueness of the lake. The phaeton had been drawn down the narrow stony road that led to the water's edge between two bluffs. Hodge had loosed the horses and had led them out into the lake to drink. A fire had been lighted on the beach, and around it the family, with the exception of Pheasant and old Mrs. Whiteoak, were enjoying themselves in their own fashions. Wake, with upturned knickers, was paddling along the water's rim. Renny was throwing sticks for his spaniels. Nicholas and Ernest were skipping stones. Mag, in a disreputable old sweater, was bent over the fire, cherishing the tea kettle. Alayne was carrying driftwood. Lady Buckley, very upright on a rug spread on the beach, was knitting at something of a bright red color. Before Pierce joined the others on the beach, he went to speak to his grandmother, who sat regarding the scene from the safety of her seat in the phaeton. Well, Gran, are you having a good time? Put your head in so I can kiss you. Ah, there's the boy. Yes, I'm having a very good time. I used to bring the children to picnics here more than 60 years ago. I remember sitting on this very spot and watching your grandfather teach the boys to swim. Nick was a little water dog, but Ernest was always screaming that he was going to drown. Oh, we had the times. This was a grand country then. I suppose so, Gran. Yes, the wood pigeons were so thick they'd fly in clouds that would throw a great shadow. The farm boys would trap them. Pretty, pretty things with eyes like jewels. They'd put the pretty eyes out of one, the brutes, and they'd throw it in a field. And when the flock saw it fluttering, they thought it was feeding, and they'd alight in a cloud, and the boys and men would shoot them by hundreds. No such shooting now, Gran. Go and see when tea will be ready. I want my tea. And Pierce, keep your eyes on Pheasant. She's young, she's young, and her mother was bad, and her father a rip. She's worth watching. Look here, Gran. I don't like your saying such things about Pheasant. She's all right. I dare say she is, but she's worth watching. All women are, if they've any looks. I want my tea. Pierce was smiling at the old lady's advice as he strode along the beach. He was tolerantly amused by her, and yet he thought, there's a grain of truth in what she says. Girls are worth watching. Still, there's no one about but Tom Fennel that she could. There's Eden. He has nothing to do, might amuse himself. Poets, immoral fellows. I'll spend more time with her. I might take her to the falls for the weekend. There's that new inn there. She'd like that, poor little young'un. The lake was the color of lapis lazuli. Some gulls, disturbed by the barking of the dogs, wheeled, petulantly crying above its brightness. Beyond them, a coaling schooner with blackened sails moved imperceptibly, and a steamer bound for Niagara trailed its faint streamer of smoke. Little sailing boats were languishing in some yacht club race. Pierce went up to Renny, whose eyes were fixed on Flossie swimming after a stick, while Merlin, having retrieved his, barked himself off his feet in agonized demand for another opportunity to exhibit his powers. As Pierce approached, the spaniel shook himself vigorously, sending a drenching shower over the brother's legs. "She has got it," said Renny, his eyes still on Floss, and he called out to her, "Good girl." "Damn Merlin," said Pierce. "He soaked my trouser legs." "All in white, eh?" observed Renny, looking him over. "You didn't expect me to come in overalls, did you? Have we time for a swim before tea?" Renny bent and put his hand in the water. "It's not very cold. Suppose we do. Tea can wait." "Where's Eden?" asked Pierce, casting his eyes over the party. "He was up on the bluff with Pheasant a bit ago." Looking up, they saw his fair head rising just above the grass where he lay stretched at Pheasant's feet. "I won't have him hanging about her," burst out Pierce. "Tell him so, then," said Renny, curtly. "By the Lord, I will. I'll tell him so he'll not forget." His mind suddenly was a seething sea of suspicions. "Why, even Gran thinks there's something wrong. She was warning me just now." "No need to get in a stew," said Renny, throwing the stick for Merlin, who leaped to the water with a bark of joy, while his place was immediately taken by a dripping, importunate Flossie. "Eden and Alayne will be leaving before the 1st of July. Evans has a job for him then. What a loafer he is. You didn't expect him to work with a broken leg, did you? Don't grouse about anything now. This is Wake's birthday party. Come on and have our swim." He shouted to Wakefield. "Wake, should you like to go in for a swim?" Wakefield came galloping through the wavelets. "Should I? Oh, splendid. What if I had the pony here? She'd swim out with me, I'll bet." "Eden," called Renny. "We're going in swimming. Better come." They stared up at him as he scrambled to his feet and began to descend the steep path down the side of the bluff. He still limped from the effects of his fall. "Won't it be pretty cold?" he asked. "We might have Maggie boil a kettle of water to warm a spot for you," said Pierce. "Where's Finch?" asked Renny. "Finch will want to come." Wakefield answered, "He's in the little cove already, lying on the sand." The four made toward the cove. "Don't let Uncle Ernest come," said Eden. "He's sure to hurt me." "Uncle Ernest!" shouted Renny. "Eden says you're not to come. You're too rough." "Eden, Eden!" cried Ernest, but with a certain pride. "I wish you would let me forget that." Grandmother's voice came from the phaeton, sharp with the anguish of hunger. "When are we going to have tea? I told Pierce to fetch me tea." "I am bringing you a molasses scone to stay you, Mamma," said Augusta. She was carefully making her way across the shingle, the buttered scone in her hand. When the four brothers reached the little willow-fringed cove, they found Finch lying face downward, his head propped on his arms. "Still sulking?" asked Pierce. "Did you know, Renny, that the poor youth is obsessed by the idea that we make more of Wake's birthday than his? Isn't it heart-rending, Wake?" Wakefield, smiling and self-conscious, stared down at Finch's prostrate form. "If I get this leg chilled," observed Eden, "I might have rheumatism." "You won't get chilled if I am with you," said Pierce, pulling off his coat. When the others had plunged into the lake, and Wake was already screaming with delight and terror at Pierce's hands, Renny returned to Finch and said with a fatherly air, "Better come in, Finch. It'll do you good. You've been studying too much." "No, I don't want to," mumbled the boy against his arm. "Don't be a duffer," said Renny, poking him with his bare foot. "The more Pierce sees he can rattle you, the more he'll do it. 'Tisn't only that. Well, look here. It was too bad I gave you that cuff before the others, but you were too damn cheeky. Come along and forget it." Finch rolled over, disclosing a distorted red face. "Is there no place I can be let alone?" he bawled. "Have I got to go to the end of the world to be let alone? All I ask is to be let alone, in peace here, and you all come prodding me up. Stay alone then, you little idiot." Renny tossed away the cigarette he was smoking and strode to the water's edge. All very well, Finch thought, for a lordly being like Renny, safe, always sure of himself, unmenaced by dreadful thoughts and bewitchment, of whom even Pierce stood in some awe. With his head propped on his hand, he watched his brothers swimming, splashing, diving, the sunshine glistening on their white shoulders. As a creature apart, he watched them, with the idea in his mind that there was a conspiracy against him, that each member of the family played a different part against him, talking him over among themselves, sneering and laughing at him. But, in spite of himself, a slow smile of pleasure in their glistening grace, their agility, crept over his features. Their robust shouts were not unmusical, and the shine of their sleek heads, blonde and russet and black, pleased his eyes. He saw that Pierce was rough with Eden, and he was glad. He wished they would fight, half kill each other, while he reclined on the sand looking on. Eden came limping out of the water. "Are there any towels?" he asked. "Run and ask Meg for towels, like a good fellow, Finch." Oh yes, he was a good fellow when there was an errand to be run, but he hurried across the shingle to his sister. "Towels? Yes, here they are. This big red and white one for Renny, mind, and the two smaller ones for Eden and Pierce. And send Wake to me. I must give him a good rubbing so he shan't take a chill." A sudden mood of savage playfulness came over Finch. Snatching the towels, he went, with a wild fling of his body, back toward the cove. There he hurled the twisted bundle at his brothers. "There are your old towels," he yelled, and as he crashed among the brushwood beyond the willows, he called back, "You're to go to Maggie, young Wake, and get walloped." Alayne had joined Pheasant on the bluff, and presently Renny too mounted the path, his damp russet head appearing first above the brink, like the ruffled crest of some bird of prey. He threw himself on the short, thick clover that carpeted the bluff, and lighted his pipe. "It seems rather hard," said Pheasant in her childish voice, "that Alayne and I could not have bathed. By the noise you made, we could imagine the fun you were having. It was too cold for girls. It is a scientific fact," she said sententiously, "that our sex can endure more cold than yours." "We had no bathing suits." "We should have all brought bathing suits and made a proper party of it. You have no idea how stupid it is to sit twiddling one's thumbs while you males are enjoying yourselves. Men must work, and women must weep. That is the White Oak motto. Only you translate it into, men must play, and women... Do help me out with something really biting, Alayne." Alayne answered only with a shrug. Renny continued to stare out across the moving brilliance of the water, puffing at his pipe. With a sort of taciturn tyranny, he overrode the younger girl's desire for chatter and chaff. She too fell silent, plucking at the grass, and then, after a sidelong glance at the other two, she rose and began slowly to descend the path. "Why are you going, Pheasant?" called Alayne sharply. "I think someone should help Maggie to lay the cloth." "Very well. If I can be of use, please call me." Now a shudder of excitement ran through her. It was the first time in weeks that she had been alone with Renny. She almost wished that she had followed Pheasant. For some time he had avoided her. Their rides, which had been interrupted by the heavy snowfalls of January and the illness of Eden, had not been resumed. Although they lived in the house together, they were separated by a wall, a relentless wall of ice, through which each was visible to the other, though distorted by its glacial diffusions. Now on the cliff, in the sunshine, the wall seemed likely to melt, and with it the barrier of her intellectual self-control. If she could only know what he was feeling, his very silence was to her a tentative embrace. Like incense, the sweetness of the wood smoke rose from the beach. Wake's little naked figure was darting here and there like a sandpiper. She studied Rennie's profile, the carved nose, the lips gripping the pipe, the damp hair plastered against the temples. It was so immobile that a heavy depression began to drown her mood of passionate excitement. Looking at him, remembering Eden, she began to feel that she had had enough of Whiteoaks. She had bruised her soul against their wanton egotism. This Renny whom she loved was as remote, as self-sufficient as that rock out yonder. His look of passionate immobility might be the mask of nothing more than a brooding desire to acquire some meddlesome piece of horseflesh for his stalls. Yet how could that be? And she have that feeling that his very silence was an embrace. Two shadowy arms seemed to spring from his shoulders toward her, crushing her to him, kissing her with the passion of his kisses in the orchard, with, added to them, all the hunger of these months of self-restraint. His fleshly arms had not moved. One lay across his thigh, the other slanted toward his pipe, the bowl of which lay in his palm. He took his pipe from his lips and spoke in a low, husky voice. His words overwhelmed her. She was like a mariner who, fearing certain shoals, watching with both dread and desire for the light that warned of their nearness, is suddenly blinded by that light, full in the eyes. Excitement, resentment, depression all left her. She was conscious only of his love. "I love you," he said, "and I am in hell because I love you, and there is no way out." The magical experience of sitting on the cliff with Renny, hearing these words from his mouth, in his restrained voice, filled Alayne with a sense of reckless surrender rather than tragic renunciation. Like a crop from virgin soil, this first profound love gushed upward from her being to embrace the hot sun of his passion. With Renny it was very different. A man who had loved women both casually and licentiously, who could not speak their language, who had thought to have and craved to have no other sort of feelings toward them, he felt himself betrayed by this new and subtle passion that went deeper than mere possession, that could not be gratified and forgotten. In his eyes was something of the bewilderment of the animal that finds itself wounded, unable to exercise the faculties which had been its chief delight. Love, which had hitherto been to him as a drink of fresh water, now tasted of the bitter salt of renunciation. He muttered again, "There is no way out." She said, almost in a whisper, "No, I suppose there is nothing to be done." It was as though a traveler, pointing to the rising moon, had said to another, "There is no moon." He caught that strange denial of her words in her tone. Looking into her face, he perceived the warmth and pathos there. He exclaimed with a groan, "I would cut everything, take you away, if only he were not my brother." In an odd, choking voice that seemed to come from a long way off, she reminded him, "Your half-brother." "I never think of that," he said coldly. His attachment to his brothers was so tenacious that it always had annoyed him to hear them spoken of as half-brothers. After a moment of silence that seemed made manifest by a veil of wood smoke that rose and hung over them for a space, she said, with a tremor in her voice, "I will do whatever you tell me to." "I believe you would," he answered. With sudden realization, he knew that her life was to her as important as his to himself, and yet she was putting it into his hands with heroic selflessness. They became aware that those on the beach were calling to them, and, looking down, they saw that they were beckoning. The cloth was laid. Already Nicholas, with the help of Pierce, was letting himself down heavily into the unaccustomed posture of sitting on the ground. "Tea is ready. Come down. Come," echoed the voices. The two rose mechanically like two untroubled puppets, under the blue immensity of heaven, and turned toward the path. "Your heels are too high for such a rough place," he said. "Let me take your hand." She placed her hand in his, and he held it in his thin, muscular grasp till they reached the shingle. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Jalna by Mazo de la Roche. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Atul Sharma, Winnipeg, Canada. June night at Jalna. Two members of the picnic party did not return with the others to Jalna. Pierce went through the ravine to Vaughnlands, and with Maurice Vaughn drove to Stead to a meeting of fruit growers. Finch too went to Vaughnlands, but he cycled along the country road and entered by the front road into the house. He knew Maurice was going out with Pierce, and since the housekeeper was almost totally deaf, he might make music with all the wild fervour that he chose, with no one but himself to hear. All day Finch had been straining toward the hour, yet he knew that he should at this moment be in his room at home, swatting for the physics exam tomorrow. He should not have gone to the picnic at all, though he had compromised by taking a textbook with him to study at odd moments. In reality, he had not read one word of it. The book had been nothing more than a mask, behind which he had hidden for a while his angry, sullen face. When he had fastened it in its strap to the handlebar of his bicycle, he had muttered something about going to study with George Fennell. He had lied, and he did not care. This evening he must be free. His soul must stretch its wings in the spaces of the night. Music would set him free. This new freedom, which music had the power to cast over him like a bright armor, was most of all freedom from his own menacing thoughts and, better still, freedom from God. God no longer frightened him, no longer pursued him in his loneliness, following him even to his bed with face that changed from thunderous darkness to fiery whiteness, from old to young. On evenings when music had made him brave and free, he marched home through the ravine, singing as he marched, and no more afraid of God than of the whippoorwills that called to their loves among the trees, or of the quivering stars. Sometimes the thought of being loved by God rather than pursued by him filled him with ecstasy, blinded him with tears. Often, and more often as the months flew on, he did not believe in God at all. God was nothing but a dragon of childhood, fear personified, of which a Scottish nurse in tiny boyhood had sown the seed. Yet he did not want to lose this fear of God entirely, for it had in it the power of submerging the more terrible fear of himself. Once, in a strange flash of inwardness, he had thought that perhaps God and he were both afraid, each afraid of his own reflection as seen in the other's eyes. Perhaps even, God and he were one. In the forsaken house, he sat very upright on the piano stool, only his hands moving firmly and with spirit over the keys. The piece he played was no more pretentious than that which any boy of talent might execute after an equal number of lessons. Nevertheless, there was something special in Finch's playing, in the way his sheepish air gave place to confidence when he sat before the piano, in the firm dexterity of his beautiful hands, such a contrast to his unprepossessing face, which kept him in his teacher's mind long after the lesson was over. More than once the teacher had said to a colleague, "I have one pupil, a boy named Whiteoak, who isn't like any of the others. He has genius of some kind, I am sure. But whether music is its natural expression, or whether it is just a temporary outlet for something else, I can't yet make out. He's a queer, shy boy." Finch sat playing now, neither shy nor queer. The room was dark except for the moonlight that serenely fell across his hands on the keys. Through the open window, the rich, sweet scents of this June night poured in a changeful stream, now the odor of the cool, fresh earth, now the heavy scent of certain yellow lilies that grew beneath the window, now the mixed aroma of wildflowers, last year's leaves, and rich mold that poured up from the ravine. The breeze blew in, now warm and gentle as love's first kiss, now with a chill born from some sequestered place not yet warmed by the summer sun. All these scents and warmths and coolnesses Finch wove into his music. He had a strange sensation that night that many years had fled by with averted faces since the hour of the picnic, that all those he knew, indeed all the people of the world, were dead, that he alone lived and was creating by his will, his music, the June night of a new world. He felt the wondrous elation of creating, and at the same time a great sadness, for he knew that the world he was creating could not last, that it was no more than the shadow of a shadow, that the dancing streams, the flying petals, the swift winds that were born beneath his fingers would dry and wither and fall as the music sank to silence. A clock on the chimney-piece struck 10 in a thin, far-away tone. Finch remembered tomorrow's examination. He must go home and study for a couple of hours, try to get something into that brain of his besides music. But at any rate, his brain felt clearer for the music. He felt wonderfully clear-headed tonight. All sights and sounds seemed to him magnified, intensified. With luck, he might in the next few hours absorb the very problems upon which the questions of the examination would be based. The worst was that, as he had told Maggie he was going to study with George Fennel, he must go a long piece out of his way in order that he might arrive from the direction of the rectory. The night was so mild that some of the family were almost certain to be about, and if he appeared out of the ravine, it would at once be suspected that he had been at Vaughanlands. Just one piece more. He could not tear himself away yet. He played on, losing himself in the delight of that growing sympathy between his hands and the keyboard. Then he gently closed the piano and went out onto the veranda, shutting the door behind him. A puff of warm air met him, as though it had been deliberately blown on him to entice him into the woods, to keep him there till he forgot all the things he had so painfully learned at school, and knew only the mathematics of the seasons and the language of the trees. He mounted his wheel and rode across the lawn. The basin where the house stood was flooded by moonlight, like a shallow bowl with golden wine. The air was full of whisperings and stirrings. The very grass across which he glided seemed a magic carpet. He flew along the road, faster and faster, through the little hamlet, past the rectory. There was a light up in George's attic room, and poor George swatting away. What if he went in and spent the night with George? He could telephone to Jalna. No, he wanted to be by himself. George was too solid, too prosaic for him tonight. He could see his slow smile, hear his, "Whatever put such fool ideas into your head, Finch?" Down the lane into the woods of Jalna, the black pine trees blacker than the blackest night. How did they manage it? No darkness could obliterate them. How lovely the little birchwood must look in the moonlight. All the silver birches in their own fair communion in the midst of the black pines. If he left his wheel here, he might go to the birchwood and see it in this first silvery night of June. Take a picture of it back to his room in his mind's eye. His mind's eye. What a singular phrase. He thought of his mind's eye, round, glowing, rapturous and frightened by turns. The mind has 1,000 eyes, and the heart but one. Yet the light of a whole life dies when love is done. It must have been the eye of his heart which he had been imagining, that flaming, rapturous, terrified eye. When love is done. Love had not begun for him. He thought it never would. Not that kind of love. He was not at all sure that he wanted it. He was running lightly along the woodland path that wound among the pines. There were before him 5 slender young birches, sprung from the trunk of a fallen and decayed pine, like 5 fabled virgins from the torso of a slain giant. Beyond them, the birchwood lay in the mystery of moonlight. The delicate, drooping boughs seemed to float above the immaculate boles. This was the spot where one morning he had seen Renny standing with a strange woman in his arms. The place had ever since been haunted by that vision. He was therefore scarcely surprised when he heard low voices as he reached the outer fringe of trees. Was Renny up to his love games again? He halted among the young ferns and listened. He peered through the strange misty radiance that seemed to be distilled from the trunks and foliage of the birches themselves, rather than to fall from above, and tried to see who were the 2 who had sought this hidden spot. Every nerve in his body was quivering, taut as the strings of a musical instrument. At first he could make out nothing but the dew-wet mistiness of light and shade, the strange luster that hung above a patch of greensward. All about him the air was full of mysterious rustlings and sighings, as though every leaf and blade and fern frond were sentient. Then the murmur of voices, the sound of long, passionate kisses drew his gaze toward a particular spot, sheltered by some hazel bushes. Scarcely breathing, he crept closer. He heard a low laugh, and then the voice that laughed said, "Pheasant, pheasant, pheasant," over and over again. It was Eden's voice. Then, rushing breathless words from Pheasant, and then a deep sigh, and again the sound of kisses. Oh, they were wicked. He could have rushed in on them in his rage and slain them. It would have been right and just. They had betrayed Pierce, his beloved brother, his hero. In imagination, he crashed in on them through the hazel bushes, trampling the ferns, and struck them again and again till they screamed for pity. But he had no pity. He beat them down as they clung about his knees, till their blood soaked the greensward and the glade reverberated with their cries. He was dazed. He drew his hand across his eyes. Then he moved closer toward them through the hazels, not seeing where he was going, dizzy. Her voice gasped. What was that? He stopped. There was silence, except that the beating of his heart filled the universe. What was that? Nothing but a rabbit or a squirrel. Finch dropped to his knees. With great caution he turned and began to creep away from them. He crept till he reached the path into the pine wood. Then he got to his feet and began to run. He sped along the needle-strewn path with great strides like a hunted deer. His mouth was open, his breath coming in sobbing gasps. When he reached the place where he had left his wheel, he did not stop. Nothing mechanical could move with the speed of his swift, avenging feet. He ran down the lane, waving his arms. He flew across the pasture, past a group of sleeping cattle. Missing the bridge, he waded across the stream through the thick, clinging watercress, slipped and sprawled on the bank into a great golden splash of kingcups, and pressed on toward the stables. Pierce had just driven into the yard when he arrived. Finch ran up in front of the car, his wild white face and disheveled hair startling in the glare of the lamps. His hand was on his side, where a pain like a knife was stabbing him. "What's the matter?" cried Pierce, springing out of the car. Finch pointed in the direction whence he had come. "They're there," he said thickly. "Back there, in the woods." "What the devil is the matter with you?" asked Pierce, coming around to him. "Have you had a fright?" Finch caught his brother by the arm and repeated, "In the wood. Making love, both of them, kissing, making love. Who? Tell me whom you mean. I don't know what you're talking about." Pierce was impatient, yet, in spite of himself, he was excited by the boy's wild words. "Eden, the traitor!" cried Finch, his voice breaking into a scream. "He's got Pheasant in the wood there. Pheasant! They're wicked, I tell you. False as hell." Pierce's hand was as a vice on his arm. "What did you see?" Nothing, but behind the hazel bushes I heard them whispering, kissing. Oh, I know. I wasn't born yesterday. Why did they go so far away? She wouldn't have let him kiss her like that unless—" Pierce gave him a shake. "Shut up. No more of that. Now listen to me. You are to go straight to your room, Finch. You are to say nothing of this to anyone. I am going to find them." His full, healthy face was ghastly. His eyes blazed. "I'll kill them both, if what you say is so, Finch. Now go to the house." He asked then, in a tone almost matter-of-fact, just where Finch had seen them, why he had gone there himself. Finch incoherently repeated everything. Something of their excitement must have been transmitted to the animals, for the dogs began to bark, and a loud whinny came from the stables. The moon was sinking, and a death-like pallor lay across the scene. Pierce turned away, cursing as he stumbled over the tongue of a cart. A mist was rising above the paddock, and he ran into this obscurity, disappearing from Finch's eyes, as though swallowed by some sinister force of nature. Finch stared after him till he was lost to view, then stumbled toward the house. He felt suddenly tired and weak, and yet he could not go to the house as he had been bid. He saw a light in Alayne's room. Poor Alayne. He shuddered as he thought of what Pierce would do to Eden. And yet he had done right to tell this terrible thing. He could not have hidden such evil doing in his heart, connived at their further sin. Still, it was possible that his own evil imagination had magnified their act into heinousness. Perhaps even they were no worse than others. He had heard something about the loose morals of the younger generation. Well, Pheasant was only 18, Eden 24. They were young and perhaps no worse than others. What about Alayne herself? Was she good? Those long rides with Renny, her moving into a room by herself, away from Eden. Finch had heard a whispered reference to that between Meg and Aunt Augusta. Would he ever know right from wrong? Would he ever know peace? All he knew was that he was alone, very lonely, afraid. Afraid now for Eden and Pheasant, while a few minutes ago he had thought only of crushing them in the midst of their wickedness. He crossed the lawn and followed the path into the ravine. The stream, narrower here than where he had waded through it crossing the meadows, ran swiftly, still brimming from heavy spring rains. Luxuriant bushes, covered by starry white flowers, filled the night with their fragrance. Renny was sitting on the strong wooden handrail of the little bridge, smoking and staring dreamily down into the water. Finch would have turned away, but Renny had heard his step on the bridge. "That you, Pierce?" he asked. "No, it's me, Finch." "Have you just come back from the rectory?" "No, Renny, I've been practicing." He expected a rebuke, but none came. Renny scarcely seemed to hear him, seemed hardly aware of his presence. Finch moved closer, with a dim idea of absorbing some of his strength by mere proximity. In the shadow of that unique magnificence, he did not feel quite so frightened. He wished that he might touch Renny, hold on to his fingers, even his tweed sleeve, as he had when he was a little fellow. Renny pointed down into the water. "Look there," he said. Looking, Finch saw a glossy wet back gliding across the silver shimmer of the stream. It was a large water rat, out on some nocturnal business of its own. They watched it till it reached the opposite bank, where, instead of climbing out as they had expected, it nosed among the sedges for a moment, and then moved into the stream again, slowly passing under the bridge. Renny went to the other side and peered after it. "Here he comes," he murmured. "Wonder what he's after," said Finch, but he did not move. Down there in the dark brightness of the water he saw a picture. Eden lying dead, with Alayne wringing her hands above his body, and as the wavelets obliterated it, another took its place. Pierce, purple-faced, struggling, kicking on a gallows. Icy sweat poured down Finch's face. He put out a hand gropingly and staggered from the bridge and up the path. On the ridge above the ravine, he hesitated. Should he go back and pour out the whole terrible tale to Renny? Perhaps it was not too late, if they ran all the way, to prevent a disaster. He stood, gnawing at his knuckle distractedly, the clinging wetness of his trouser legs making him shiver from head to foot. He seemed incapable of movement, or even of thought now. But suddenly he was stirred to both by the sound of Eden's laugh, near at hand, on the lawn. Then Pheasant's voice came, speaking in a natural, unhurried tone. Pierce had somehow missed them, and while he was crashing through the woods in pursuit, they were strolling about the lawn, as though they had been there all the while. Finch moved out from the darkness and stood before them. Eden had just struck a match, and he was holding it to a cigarette. The flame danced in his eyes, which looked very large and bright, and gave an ironical twist to the faint smile that so often hovered about his lips. Pheasant uttered an exclamation that was almost a cry. "Don't go in the house," said Finch heavily. "I mean, go away. I've told Pierce about you. I heard you in the birchwood, and I ran back and told Pierce." Eden held the still flaring match near Finch's face, as though it were some supernatural ray by which he could look into his very soul. "Yes," he said steadily. "Go on. He's after you. He looked terrible. You'd better go away." Pheasant made a little moaning sound like a rabbit caught in a trap. Eden dropped the match. "What a worm you are, Brother Finch," he said. "I don't know where we Whiteoaks ever got you." He turned to Pheasant. "Don't be frightened, darling. I will take care of you." "Oh, oh," she cried. "What shall we do?" "Hush." Finch said, "He'll be back any minute," and turned away. He could not go into that house with its peacefully shining lights, where the others were still talking perhaps of the picnic, all unwitting of the thunderbolt that hung over them. He skulked around the house, through the kitchen garden, through the orchard, and out on the road that led to the churchyard. The church steeple, rising from among the tapering cedars, pointed more sharply than they toward the sky. The church had gathered to itself the darkest shadows of tree and tomb, and drawn them like a cloak about its walls. The dead, lying beneath the dewy young grass, seemed to Finch to be watching him as he climbed the steep steps from the road, out of hollow eye sockets in which no longer was boldness or terror or lust, but only resigned decay. They no longer were afraid of God. All was over. They had nothing to do but lie there till their bones were light as the pollen of a flower. Ah, but he was afraid of God. Fear was his flesh, his marrow, his very essence. Why had the moon sunk and left him in this blackness alone? What had he done? He had ruined the lives of Pierce and Eden and Pheasant and Alayne. Were Eden and Pheasant sinful? Sin. What a mad word. Could there be sin? All the mouldering bones under this grass, their sins were no more than the odors of spring growth, warm earth, sticky leaf bud, blessed rain, sweetness. But there was that saying, to the third and fourth generation. Perhaps he was suffering tonight for the heavy sin of some far-off Whiteoak. Perhaps that baby sister, over whose grave he stood, had given up her little ghost because of some shadowy, bygone sin. He pictured her lying there, not horrible, not decayed, but fair and tender as the bud of an April flower, with little hands that held out to him. Hands held out to him. Oh, beautiful thought. That was what his lonely spirit yearned for, the comfort of outstretched hands. A sob of self-pity shook him. Tears rushed to his eyes and poured down his cheeks. He cast himself on the ground among the graves and lay there, his face against the grass. All the accumulated experience of the dead beneath him, passing into his body, became one with him. He lay there inert, exhausted, drinking in at every pore the bitter sweetness of the past. Hands stretched out to him, the hands of soldiers, gardeners, young mothers, infants, and one far different from the others. Hands from which emanated a strange white glow, not open-palmed, but holding something toward him, the living bread, Christ's hands. He knelt among the mounds and held up his own hands, curved like petals, to receive. His thin boy's body was torn by sobs as a sapling in the hailstorm. He put his hands to his mouth. He had received the bread. He felt the sacred fire of it burn through his veins, scorch his soul, Christ in him. Overcome, he sank beside his mother's grave and threw his arm about it. Little white daisies shone out at the dark grass like tender, beaming eyes. He pressed closer, closer, drawing up his knees, curling his body like a little child's, thrusting his breast against the grave, and cried, "Mother, oh mother, speak to me. I am Finch, your boy." End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Jalna by Mazo de la Roche. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Atul Sharma, Winnipeg, Canada. The Flight of Pheasant. Maurice Vaughn was sitting alone in his dining room. When he and Pierce had returned from Stead, he had brought the young fellow into the house for a drink and some cold viands, which he had got himself from the pantry. If he had had his way, Pierce would still be there, smoking, drinking, and talking with ever less clarity about fertilizers and spraying and the breeding of horses. But Pierce had refused to stay for long. He had to rise early, and for some reason he could not get Pheasant out of his head. His thoughts kept flying back to her little white face, her brown cropped hair. Her thin, eager hands seemed to tug at his sleeve, drawing him home. He had been abstracted all the evening. However, Maurice had scarcely noticed this. All he craved was company, the warmth of a human presence to pierce the chill loneliness of the house. When Pierce was gone, he sat on and on, slowly, heavily drinking without enjoyment, slowly, heavily thinking in the same numbing circle which his mind, like the glassy-eyed steed of a roundabout, had traversed for 20 years. He thought of Meg, tender and sedate, a noble young girl, as she was when they had become engaged. He thought of his old parents, their fond joy in him, their ambition with which he was in accord, that he should become one of the most brilliant and influential men in the country. He pictured his marriage with Maggie, their life together, their family of lovely girls and boys. There were 6 of these children of his fancy. He had named them all, the boys with family names, the girls with romantic names from the poets he had once admired. From the eldest to the youngest, he knew every line of the 6 young faces and had a right to know them, for he had shaped them out of the shadows to satisfy the hunger of his heart. For them he had a love he had never given to Pheasant. He thought of that affair with her mother, of their meetings in the twilight, of her clutching his knees and begging him to marry her when she found she was with child, of his tearing himself away. Then the basket with the baby, the note. Here, a feeling approaching nausea made him shift in his chair. The family consternation, the family conclaves, Meg's throwing him over, his parents' death, financial distresses, the end of ambition, and so on through the whole gloomy business of his life, in which the brightest spot was the war, where he had been able for a time to forget the past and ignore the future. As he completed the circle, the room reeled a little with him. His chin sank on his breast, and the electric light brought out the increasing whiteness of the patches on his temples. He did not sleep, but consciousness was suspended. The sound of someone softly entering the room did not rouse him. With his heavy underlip dropped, his eyes staring into space, he sat motionless as a sullen rock buried in the heaviness of the sea. Pheasant felt a pang of pity as she saw him sitting alone in the cold, unshaded electric light. He looks frightfully blue, she thought, and he's getting round-shouldered. Then her mind flew back to her own tragic situation, and she went to him and touched him on the arm. "Maurice!" He started, and then, seeing who it was, he said in a surly tone, "Well, what do you want?" "Oh, Maurice," she breathed, "be kind to me. Don't let Pierce into the house. I'm afraid he'll kill me." He stared stupidly at her and then growled, "Well, it's what you deserve, isn't it?" Yes, I deserve it. But how did you know? Have you seen anyone?" He considered a moment, staring at the decanter on the table. "Yes, Pierce was here." "Pierce? Here? Oh, he was searching for me." She wrung her hands frantically. "Oh, Maurice, please don't let him in again. I've been wandering about in the dark for hours, and at last I thought I'd come to you, for after all I am your child. You've a right to protect me, no matter what I've done." He roused himself to say, "What have you done?" "Didn't Pierce tell you anything?" "No." "But he was searching for me." "No, he wasn't." "Then how did you know something was wrong?" "I didn't." "But you said I deserved to be killed." "Well, don't you?" he demanded with drunken raillery. "Maurice, you're drunk. Oh, whatever shall I do?" She threw herself on his knees, clasping his neck. "Try to understand. Say you'll not let Pierce kill me." She broke into pitiful wails. "Oh, Maurice, I've had to run away from Pierce, and I love him so." "He was here a bit ago," said Vaughn, staring around as though he expected to find him in a corner. Then, noticing her head against his shoulder, he laid his hand on it in a rough caress, as a man might stroke a dog. "Don't cry, youngster, I'll take care of you. Glad to have you back. Damn lonely." She caught his hand and pressed a dozen wild kisses on it. "Oh, Maurice, how good you are, how good to me, and how good Pierce was to me, and I didn't deserve it. Hanging is too good for me." And she added melodramatically, "'Twere better I had never been born." She rose then and wiped her eyes. She was a pitiful little figure. Her clothes were torn from running distractedly through a blackberry plantation. Her hands and even her pale face were bleeding from scratches. She had lost a shoe, and the stocking foot was wet with mud. "Yes, 'twere," he repeated agreeably. With a certain pathetic dignity, she turned toward the door. "Will it be all the same to you, Maurice, if I go to my room?" "Same to me, wherever you go, absolutely." "How different this hall," she thought, as she dragged herself up the bare stairs, from the luxurious hall at Jalna, with its thickly carpeted stairs, its dark red rugs, its stained glass window. The great moose head, which had been her especial terror in childhood, now glared down its long, hard nose at her, with nostrils distended, as though it longed to toss her on its cruel horns. She felt dazed. She scarcely suffered, except for the aching in her legs, as she threw herself across her old bed. With half-shut eyes she lay staring at the two pictures on the wall opposite, wide awake and fast asleep, which had once hung in Maurice's nursery. Darling little baby pictures. How she had always loved them. She wished she had the strength of mind to kill herself, tear the sheets into strips and wind them tighter and tighter around her throat. Or, better still, hang herself from one of the rafters in that back room in the attic. She saw herself dangling there, purple-faced, saw horrified Maurice discovering her, saw herself buried at the crossroad with a stake in her inside. She did not know whether that was still done, but it was possible that the custom would be revived for her. She fell into a kind of nightmare doze, in which the bed rocked beneath her like a cradle. It rocked faster and faster, rolling her from side to side. She was not a real, a wholesome infant, but a grotesque changeling, leering up at the distraught mother who now peered in at her, shrieking, tearing her hair. Again the scream rent the silence, and Pheasant, with sweat starting on her face, sprang up in bed. She was alone. The electric light shone brightly. Again came the loud peal, not a scream, but the ringing of the doorbell. She leaped to the floor. The lock of the door had been broken many years. She began to drag at the washstand to barricade it. Downstairs the sound had also penetrated Vaughn's stupor. He lurched to the door which Pheasant had locked behind her, and threw it open. Renny and Pierce Whiteoak stood there, their faces like two pale discs against the blackness. Renny at once stepped inside, but Pierce remained in the porch. "Is Pheasant here?" asked Renny. "Yes." He eyed them with solemnity. Renny turned to his brother. "Come in, Pierce." Vaughn led the way toward the dining room, but Pierce stopped at the foot of the stairs. "Is she upstairs?" he asked in a thick voice, placing one hand on the newel post as though to steady himself. Vaughn, somewhat sobered by the strangeness of the brother's aspect, remembered something. "Yes, but you're not going up to her. You'll let her alone." "He won't hurt her," said Renny. "He's not to go up. I promised her." He took the youth's arm, but Pierce wrenched himself away. "I order you," shouted Vaughn. "Whose house is this? Whose daughter is she? She's left you. Very well, let her stay. I want her." "She is my wife. I'm going to her." "What the hell's the matter anyway? I don't know what it's all about. She comes here, done up, frightened out of her wits. I remember now. Then you come like a pair of murderers." "I must see her." "You shall not see her." Again he clutched Pierce's arm. The two struggled beneath the sinister head of the great moose, under the massive antlers of which their manhood seemed weak and futile. In a moment, Pierce had freed himself and was springing up the stairs. "Come into the dining room, Maurice," said Renny, "and I'll tell you what is wrong. Did she tell you nothing?" Maurice followed him, growling. "A strange way to act in a man's house at this hour." "Did she tell you nothing?" asked Renny when they were in the dining room. "I don't remember what she said." He picked up the decanter. "Have a drink." "No, nor you either." He took the decanter from his friend and put it in the sideboard, decisively locking the door. Vaughn regarded the action with dismal whimsicality. "What a to-do," he said, "because the kids have had a row." Renny turned on him savagely. "Good God, Maurice, you don't call this a row, do you? Well, what's the trouble anyway?" "The trouble is this. That brat of yours has wrecked poor young Pierce's life." "The hell she has. Who is the man?" "His own brother, Eden." Vaughn groaned. "Where is he?" "He made off in the car." "Why didn't she go with him? Why didn't she come to me?" "How can I tell? He probably didn't ask her." "Oh, the whole rotten business harks back to me. It's my fault. I'd no right to let Eden loaf about all winter, writing poetry. It's made a scoundrel of him." A wry smile flitted across Vaughn's face at the unconscious humor of the remark. I shouldn't blame myself too much if I were you. If writing poetry has made Eden into a scoundrel, he was probably well on the way beforehand. Possibly that's why he turned to it. There was a deep understanding between these two. They had confided in each other as they had in no one else. Renny, stirred by the disclosures of the night, burst out, Maurice, in thought I am no better than Eden. I love his wife. She's never out of my mind. Vaughn looked into the tormented eyes of his friend with commiseration. Do you, Renny? I had never thought of such a thing. She doesn't seem to me your sort of girl at all. That is the trouble. She isn't. If she were, it would be easier to put the thought of her aside. She's intellectual. I should say, she's cold. You are wrong. It is I, all my life, who have had a sort of cold sensuality. No tenderness went with my love for a woman. I don't think I had any compassion. No, I'm sure I hadn't. He knit his brows as though recalling past affairs. But I'm full of compassion for Alayne. Does she love you? Yes. What about Eden? She had a romantic devotion to him, but it's over. Does she know about this? Maurice lifted his head in the direction of the room above. Yes. I only had a glimpse of her in the hall. The house was in an uproar. She had a strange, exalted look as though nothing mattered now. I see. What is Pierce going to do? Pierce is a splendid fellow, tough as oak. He said to me, she's mine. Nothing can change that. I'm going to fetch her home. But I should pity Eden if he got his hands on him. They are coming down. Heavens, they were quiet enough. Must I speak to them? No, let the poor young beggars alone. The two came slowly down the stairs. Like people leaving the scene of a catastrophe, they carried in their eyes the terror of what they had beheld. Their faces were rigid. Pierce's mouth was drawn to one side in an expression of disgust. It was like a mask of tragedy. They stood in the wide doorway of the dining room, as in a picture framed. Maurice and Renny smiled at them awkwardly, trying to put a decent face on the affair. Going, eh? Maurice said. Have something first, Pierce. He made a movement toward the sideboard. Thanks, returned Pierce in a lifeless voice. He entered the dining room. Where's that key, Renny? Renny produced the key. A tantalus was brought forth, and a drink poured for Pierce. Maurice, with Rennie's eye on him, did not take one himself. Pierce gulped down the spirits, the glass rattling grotesquely against his teeth. Under the ashen tan of his face, color crept back. No one spoke, but the three men stared with gloomy intensity at Pheasant, still framed in the doorway. The magnetic currents between the members of the group seemed palpably to vibrate across the atmosphere of the room. Then Pheasant, putting up her hands as though to push their peering faces back from her, exclaimed, Don't stand staring at me like that. One would think you've never seen me before. You look awfully done, said Maurice. I think you ought to have a mouthful of something to brace you. A little scotch and water, eh? I might if I were asked, she returned with a pathetic attempt at bravado. She took the glass in a steady little hand and drank. I shall come along later, said Renny to Pierce. I'm going to stop a while with Maurice. But he continued to stare at Pheasant. I know I'm a scarlet woman, but I think you're very cruel. Your eyes are like a brand, Renny Whiteoak. Pheasant, I was not even thinking of you. My mind was quite somewhere else. Pierce turned on Maurice in a sudden rage. It's all your fault, he broke out vehemently. You never gave the poor child a chance. She was as ignorant as any little immigrant when I married her. She doesn't seem to have learned any good from you, retorted Vaughn. She has learned all of decency that she knows. Was she ever sent to school? She had 2 governesses. Yes, they both left inside of 6 months because they couldn't live in the house with you. Oh, I suppose it is my fault that she inherits her mother's instinct, returned Maurice bitterly. And Renny has just been telling me that it is his fault that Eden is a scoundrel. We've taken on a lot of responsibility. You're talking like fools, said Renny. Please do not quarrel about me, put in Pheasant. I think I'm going to faint or something. Better take her out in the air, said Renny. The liquor was too strong for her. Come along, said Pierce, and took her arm. The touch of his hand had an instant effect on Pheasant. A deep blush suffused her face and neck. She swayed toward him, raising her eyes to his with a look of tragic humility. Outside, the coolness of the dawn refreshed her. He released her arm and preceded her through the grove and down into the ravine. They walked in silence, she seeming no more than his shadow, following him through every divergence of the path, hesitating when he hesitated. Centuries before, two such figures might have been seen traversing this same ravine, a young Indian and his squaw, moving as his silent shadow in the first light of morning, primitive figures so much akin to the forest life about them that the awakening birds did not cease twittering as they passed. On the bridge above the stream, he stopped. Below lay the pool where they had first seen their love, reflected as an opening flower. They looked down into it now, no longer able to share the feeling its mirrored loveliness excited in them. A primrose light suffused the sky, and in a deeper tone lay cupped in the pool, around the brink of which things tender and green strove with gentle urgency to catch the sun's first rays. An English pheasant, one of some imported by Renny, moved sedately among the young rushes, its plumage shining like a coat of mail. Careless, irresponsible bird, Pierce thought, and for one wild instant he wished that she were one with the bird, that no man might recognize a woman in her but himself, that he might keep her hidden and love her secretly, untortured by the fear and loathing he now felt. Pheasant saw, drowned in that pool, all the careless irresponsibility of the past, the weakness, the indolence that had made her a victim of Eden's dalliance. If Pierce loathed her, how much more she loathed the image of Eden's face which faintly smiled at her from the changeful mirror of the pool. Just to live, to make up to Pierce by her devotion for what he had suffered, to win from his eyes love again, instead of that look of fear which he had turned on her when he entered the bedroom. She had expected rage, fury, and he had looked at her in an agony of fear, but he had taken her back. They were going home to Jalna. She longed for the thick walls of the house as a broken-winged bird for its nest. Come, he said, as though awakening from a dream, and moved on up the path that led from the ravine to the lawn. The turkeys were crossing the lawn, led by the cock whose blazing wattles swung arrogantly in the first sun rays. His wives, with burnished breasts and beaming eyes, followed close behind, craning their necks, alternately lifting and dragging their slender feet, echoing his bold gobble with plaintive pipings. The hens paused to look with curiosity at the boy and girl who emerged from the ravine, but the cock, absorbed by his own ego, circled before them, swelling himself rigidly, dropping his wings, urging into his wattles a still more burning red. Down the wet roof Finch's pigeons were strutting, sliding, rookety cooing, peering over the eaves at the two who slowly mounted the steps. Inside, the house lay in silence, except for the heavy snoring of grandmother in her bedroom off the lower hall. It was as if some strange beast had a lair beneath the stairs, and was growling a challenge to the sun. They passed the closed doors of the hall above, and went into their own room. Pheasant dropped into a chair by the window, but Pierce, with a businesslike air, began collecting various articles, his brushes, his shaving things, the clothes which he wore about the farm. She watched his movements with the unquestioning submissiveness of a child. One thought sustained her. How glad I am that I am here with Pierce and not flying with Eden as he wanted me to. When he had got together what he wanted, he took the key from the door and inserted it on the outside. He said without looking at her, "Here you stay till I can stand the sight of your face again." He went out, locking the door behind him. He climbed the long stairs to the attic, and throwing his things on the bed in Finch's room, began to change his clothes for the day's work. In the passage, he had met Alayne, looking like a ghost. They had passed without speaking. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of Jalna by Mazo de la Roche. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Atul Sharma, Winnipeg, Canada. Fiddler's Hut. 3 weeks later, Mr. Ragg was an object of great interest one morning to a group of Jersey calves as he crossed their pasture. They ceased gamboling, butting, and licking each other, to regard him with steadfast scrutiny out of liquid dark eyes. He was in his shirt sleeves, his coat being thrown over one arm, for the day was hot. His hat was tilted over his eyes, and he carried, balanced on one hand, a tray covered with a white cloth. He was smoking as usual, and his expression was one of deep concern. When he reached a stile at the far end of the paddock, he set the tray on the top, climbed over, then, balancing the tray at a still more dangerous angle, proceeded on his way. It now lay through an old uncared-for apple orchard, the great trees of which were green with moss, half smothered in wild grapevines and Virginia creeper, and their boughs, like heavy wings, swept to the long coarse grass. Following a winding path, he passed a spring, where long ago a primitive well had been made by the simple process of sinking a wooden box. The lid of this was now gone, the wood decayed, and it was used by birds as a drinking fountain and bath. The liquid gurgle of the spring as it entered the well made a pleasant undertone to the song of birds with which the air was merry. Embowered in vines, almost hidden by flowering dogwood, stood the hut where Fiddler Jock, by the consent of Captain Philip Whiteoak, had lived in solitude, the story of whose death young Finch had told Alayne on their first walk together. Here, Meg Whiteoak had been living for 3 weeks. Before approaching the threshold, Mr. Ragg again set down the tray, put on his coat, straightened his hat, threw away his cigarette, and intensified his expression of concern. "Miss Whiteoak, it's me, ma'am," he said loudly, as though to reassure her, immediately after knocking. The door opened, and Meg Whiteoak appeared with an expression as sweetly calm, but a face paler than formerly. "Thank you, Reggs," she said, taking the tray. "Thank you very much." "I'd be gratified, ma'am," he said anxiously, "if you was to lift the napkin and take a look at what I've brought you. I'd be better pleased if I knew you found it tempting." Miss Whiteoak accordingly peered under the napkin and discovered a plate of fresh scones, a bowl of ripe strawberries, and a jug of thick clotted cream such as she liked with them. A sweet smile curved her lips. She took the tray and set it on the table in the middle of the low, scantily furnished room. "It looks very tempting, Reggs. These are the first strawberries I've seen." "They are the first," he announced eagerly. "I picked them myself, ma'am. There's going to be a wonderful crop, they say, but it don't seem to matter the way things are going on with us these days." "That's very true," she said, sighing. "How is my grandmother today, Reggs?" "Flourishin' amazin', ma'am. My wife says she talked of nothing but her birthday, the old time she was doing up her room. She had a queer little spell on Thursday, but Mr. Ernest, he thought it was just that she'd eat too much of the goose gravy. She looked remarkable well yesterday, and went to church the same as usual." "That is good." She bit her full underlip and then asked, with an attempt at nonchalance, "Have you heard anything about Mrs. Eden's leaving?" "I believe she's to go as soon as the birthday celebrations are over. The old lady wouldn't hear of it before. Now, Miss Whiteoak, she's only a shadder of her former self, Mrs. Eden is, and Mr. Pierce is not much better. Of all the people in the house, those two show the wear and tear of what we're going through the most. Of course, I've never seen Mrs. Pierce. She ain't never shown up in the family circle yet, but my wife saw her looking out of the winder, and she says she looks just the same. Dear me, some people can't stand anythink. As for me, I'm not the man I was at all. My nerves have all gone back on me. It's almost like another attack of shell shock, you might say." "I'm very sorry, Reggs. You do look pale." He took out a clean folded handkerchief and wiped his brow. "It isn't as though my own family relations was what they were, ma'am. Mrs. Ragg and me, we had our little altercations, as you know. But take it as a whole,
Our life together was amiable. But now," he dolefully shook his head, "it's nothing more nor less than terrific. Me being on your side, and she all for Mr. Renny, there's never a moment's peace. Why, yesterday, Sunday and all as it was, she up and shied the stove lifter at me head. I escaped to the coal cellar, where she pursued me, and as for her language, well, Mr. Renny, he heard the goings on, and he came rattling down the basement stairs in a fine rage, and said if he heard any more of it we should go. The worst was, he seemed to blame me for the old affair. I never thought I'd live to see the day he glared at me the way he did." "That's because you were on my side, Rags," she said sadly. "I know, and it makes it all the worse. It's a house divided against itself. I've seen deadlocks in my time, but I've never seen a deadlock like this. Well, I'll be taking away what little appetite you have with my talk. I must be off. I have 1,000 things to do, and of course Mrs. Ragg puts all the hard work on me as usual. And if you'll believe me, ma'am, she's so evilly disposed that I had to steal those little scones I brought you."
He turned away, and when he had gone a few yards he put on his hat, removed his coat, and lighted a cigarette. Just as he reached the stile he met Renny Whiteoak crossing it. Renny said sarcastically, "I see you have a path worn to the hut, Rags. Been carrying trays to Miss Whiteoak, I suppose?" Rags straightened himself with an air of self-righteous humility.
"And if I didn't carry trays to her, what do you suppose would happen, sir? Why, she'd starve. That's what she'd do. It would look rather bad, sir, for Liddy to die of starvation on her brother's estate, and him living in the lap of luxury."
This remark was thrown after the retreating figure of his master, who had strode angrily away. Rags stared after him till he disappeared among the trees, muttering bitterly,
"This is all the gratitude I get for the way I've slaved for you in war and in peace. Curses yesterday, and a sneer and a dirty look today. You ill-tempered domineer and red-headed slave-driver, but you've met your match in Miss Whiteoak, let me tell you, and serves you right."
With this he climbed over the stile and returned meditatively to the basement kitchen. When Renny reached the hut, he found the door open, and inside he could see his sister sitting by the table, pouring herself a cup of tea. She looked up as she heard his step, and then, with an expression of remote calm, dropped her eyes to the stream of amber liquid issuing from the spout of the teapot. She sat with one rounded elbow on the table, her head supported on her hand. She looked so familiar and yet so strange, sitting in these poverty-stricken surroundings, that he scarcely knew what to say to her. However, he went in and stood looking down at the tray. "What particular meal is this?" he asked.
"I have no idea," she answered, buttering a scone. "I keep no count of meals now."
He looked about him at the low, rain-stained ceiling, the rusty stove, the uneven, worm-eaten floor, the inner room with its narrow cot bed. "This is an awful hole you've chosen to sulk in," he commented. She did not answer, but ate her scone with composure, and after it 2 strawberries smothered in cream. "You'll make a charming old lady after you've spent 10 years or so here," he jibed. He saw a sparkle of temper in her eyes then.
"You will have the satisfaction of knowing that you drove me to it."
"That is utter nonsense. I did everything I could to prevent you."
"You did not send that girl away. You allowed Pierce to bring her into the house with me, after her behavior."
"Maggie, can't you see anyone's side of this question but your own? Can't you see that poor young Pierce was doing a rather heroic thing in bringing her home?"
"I will not live under the same roof with that girl. I told you that 3 weeks ago, and you still try to force me."
"But I can't allow you to go on like this," he cried. "We shall be the talk of the countryside." She regarded him steadfastly.
"Have you ever cared what the countryside thought of you?"
"No, but I can't have people saying that my sister is living in a tumble-down hut."
"You can turn me out, of course."
He ignored this and continued. "People will simply say that you have become demented."
"It will not surprise me if I do."
He stared at her, positively frightened. "Maggie, how can you say such things? By God, I have enough to bear without your turning against me." She said with calculated cruelty,
"You have Alayne. Why should you need me?" I have not got Alayne, he retorted furiously. She is going away the day after Gran's birthday. I do not think she will go away.
What do you mean? He asked suspiciously.
Oh, I think you have a pretty little game of progressive marriage going on at Jalna. No, Alayne will not go away. His highly colored face took on a deeper hue. Its lines became harsh. You'll drive me to do something desperate, he said, and flung to the door. She pushed the tray from her and rose to her feet. Will you please go? You are mistaken if you think you can abuse me into putting up with loose women in my house. As to being the talk of the countryside, there must be strange stories about the married couples of our family already.
Rot. It's all within the family.
All within the family? Just think those words over. They've got a sinister sound, like the goings-on in families in the Middle Ages. We should have been born 200 years ago at the very least. No woman who respects herself could stay at Jalna. He broke into a tirade against her, and all hard, narrow-minded women. She followed him to the door, laying her hand on the latch. You can never argue, Renny, without using such dreadful language. I can't stand any more of it. He had stepped outside, and his spaniels, having traced him to the hut, ran to meet him with joyous barks, jumping up to paw him and lick his hands. For an instant, Meg almost relented, seeing him there with his dogs, looking so entirely her beloved Renny. But the instant passed. She closed the door firmly and returned to her chair, where she sat plunged in thought, not bitterly reviewing the past as Maurice did, nor creating an imaginary and happy present, but with all her mind concentrated on those two hated alien women in her house. Renny, returning to his stables, found Maurice there, waiting to talk over some proposed exchange. He was in the stall with Wakefield's pony, feeding her with sugar from his pocket. He turned as Renny entered.
Well, he said, how are things going now?
Like the devil, he returned, slapping the pony sharply, for she had bitten at him, not liking the interruption of her feast. Pierce still keeps Pheasant locked in her room, and goes about with an expression like the wrath of God. Uncle Nicholas and Aunt Augusta quarrel all day long. He's trying to worry her out of the house and back to England, and she won't go. He and Uncle Ernest aren't speaking at all. Alayne is looking ill, and Grandmother talks ceaselessly about her birthday. She's so afraid that something will happen to her before she achieves it that she refuses to leave the room.
When is it?
A week from today. Alayne is staying here till it's over. Then she goes back to New York, to her old position with a publisher's firm. Look here, why doesn't she divorce Eden? Then you and she could marry. The proceedings would be too beastly unsavory. No, there's no hope there. Something vicious in him prompted him to tease the pony. He cuffed her till she drew back her lips, showing all her teeth, bit at him, neighed, and finally reared and struck at him with her sharp hoofs. Maurice moved out of the way. Stop it, Renny, he said, half angry and half laughing at the display of temper by the pair. You'll make her an ugly little brute for Wake to handle. That's true. He desisted at once, red-faced from temper, rather ashamed of himself. It's a pity Alayne could not have seen that. Yes, isn't it? He began to stroke the pony. Here, give me a lump of sugar, Maurice. No, I'll give it to her myself. She and I are friends. We have no quarrel to patch up. Have we, pet? He offered her sugar, but too upset to take it, she wrinkled her lips and cast baleful glances at them both. As they left the loose box, Maurice asked, How is Meg, Renny? I've just been to see her. She's still stuck in that awful hut, sulking. Nothing will budge her. It looks as though she would spend the rest of her days there. I don't know what I'm to do. If you could only see her, it would be pathetic if it weren't ridiculous. She has a few sticks of furniture she took from the attic. The floor is bare. They say that all she eats is the little that Rags carries over to her. I met him with a tray. The fellow is nothing but a spy and a tale-bearer. He keeps her thoroughly posted as to all that goes on in the house. Aunt Augusta was for starving her out, forbidding Rags to take food to her, but I couldn't do that. She shut the door in my face just now.
It's appalling.
They walked in silence for a space. along the passage between stalls, among the sounds and smells they both loved, deep, quiet drinking, peaceful crunching, soft whinnying, clean straw, harness oil, liniment. Vaughn said, "I've been wondering. In fact, I lay awake half the night wondering if there's a chance that Meg might take me now. Pheasant being gone, and Jalna in such an upset, and things having reached a sort of deadlock. It would be a way of solving the problem for her. Do you think I'd have a show?" Renny looked at his friend with amazement. "Maurice, do you really mean it? Are you still in love with her?" "You know perfectly well I've never cared for any other woman," he answered with some irritation. "It's not easy for you Whiteoaks to understand that." "I quite understand. Only 20 years is a long time between proposals. If things had not turned out as they have, I should never have asked her again. I hope to God she'll have you." And then, fearing that his tone had been too fervent, he added, "I hate to see you living such a lonely life, old man." Meg had come out of the cottage, and was bending over a spray of sweetbriar that had thrust its thorny way up through a mass of dogwood. She loved its wild sweetness, and yet it made her sadder than before. Maurice noticed, as she raised a startled face to his, that her white cheeks were dappled by tears. One of them fell and hung like a bright dewdrop on the briar. "I'm sorry if I frightened you." His voice, unheard for so many years, came to her with the somber cadence of a bell sounding through the dark. She had forgotten what a deep voice he had. As a youth it had seemed too deep for his slenderness, but now, from this heavy frame, she found it strangely, thrillingly moving. "I had no right to intrude on you," he went on, and stopped, his eyes resting on the spray of briar, for he would not embarrass her by looking into her tear-stained face. Why did she not wipe her cheeks? He reflected, with a shade of annoyance, that it was just like Maggie to leave those glittering evidences of her anguish in full view. It gave her a strange advantage, set her on a plane of suffering above those around her. Unable to speak, he rolled a cigarette deftly, in one hand, for the other had been crippled in the war. He could not have found a more poignant way of pleading his case. She had passed him often on the road and seen that he was going grey. She had heard that one of his hands was useless, but it was not until she saw the wrist in its leather bandage, above the helpless hand, that she realized how alone he was, how pathetic, how he needed to be taken care of. Renny was hard, careless, unhurt. He was arrogant, immovable. Eden was gone. Pierce clung to his wretched young wife. Finch was unsatisfactory, moody. Wake was a self-sufficient little rogue. But here was Maurice, her unhappy lover, seeking her out with a strange, hungry expression in his eyes. The droop of his mouth stirred something in her that she had forgotten, something buried for years and years. It did not stir weakly, feebly, like a half-dead thing, but boundingly, richly, like the sap that thrilled the growing things in this June day. She swayed beneath the sudden rush of its coming and put out a hand to steady herself. Color flooded her face and neck. He dropped the cigarette and caught her hand. "Maggie, Maggie," he burst out. "Have me, marry me. Maggie, oh my darling girl." She did not answer in words, but put her arms about his neck and raised her lips to his. All the stubbornness was gone from their pretty curves, and only the sweetness was left. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of Jalna by Mazo de la Roche. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Atul Sharma, Winnipeg, Canada. Grandmother's birthday. The darkness had just fallen on Grandmother's birthday. It had descended slowly, seeming reluctant to draw the curtain on that day of days. But now the sky was a royal purple, and quite 100 stars twinkled with all the mystic glamour of birthday candles. Grandmother had not slept a wink since dawn. Not for worlds would she have missed the savor of one moment of this day, toward which she had been straining for many years. She could sleep all she wanted to after the celebration was over, There would be little else to do, nothing to look forward to. With her breakfast had come all the household to congratulate her, wish her joy, and other birthdays to follow. She had put her strong old arms about each body that, in succession, had leaned over her bed, and after a hearty kiss had mumbled, "Thank you, my dear." Wakefield, on behalf of the tribe, had presented her with a huge bouquet of red, yellow, and white roses, and even 100 of them tied with red streamers. The day had been a succession of heart-touching surprises. Her old eyes had become red-rimmed from tears of joy. The farmers and villagers of the neighborhood, to whom she had been a generous friend in her day, besieged her with calls and gifts of fruit and flowers. Mr. Fennel had had the church bell ring 100 merry peals for her, the clamor of which, sounding through the valley, had transported her to her childhood in Ireland. She did not know just why, but there it was. She was in County Meath again. Mrs. Ragg had baked a 3-tiered birthday cake, which had been decorated in the city. On the top, surrounded by waves of icing, was a white and silver model of a sailing vessel, such as she had crossed the ocean in from India. On the side, in silver comfits, the date of her birth, 1825. This stood on a rosewood table in the middle of the drawing room, beside a silver-framed photograph of Captain Philip Whiteoak. How grandmother wished he could have seen the cake. She imagined herself, strong and springy of step, leading him up to the table to view it. She pictured his start of surprise, his blue eyes bulging with amazement, and his, "Hi, Adeline, there's a cake worth living 100 years for." Oh, the feel of his firm, muscular arm in her hand. A dozen times that day she had kissed the photograph. At last, Ernest had been moved to say, "Mamma, must you kiss it so often? You are moistening off all the gloss." Now night had fallen, and guests were arriving for the evening party. The Fennels, the Admiral's daughters, Miss Pink, and even old friends from a long distance. Her chair had been moved to the terrace, where she could see the bonfire all ready to be lighted. It had taken her an unconscionably long time to make the journey there, for she was weak from excitement and lack of sleep. In the summer house, 2 violins and a flute discoursed the insouciant, trilling airs of 60 years ago, filling the air with memories and the darkness with plaintive ghosts. Grandmother's sons and eldest grandson had spared no trouble or expense to make the party a memorable one. On her right hand sat Ernest and Nicholas, and on her left Augusta and Alayne. Augusta remarked to Alayne, "What a blessing that Meg is off on her honeymoon, and not sulking in Fiddler's Hut. It would have spoiled the party completely if she had been there, and even more so if she had come. She wasted no time when she finally made up her mind, did she? No, indeed. I think she was simply shamed into it. She might have gone on living there forever. Renny would have never given in." Lady Buckley regarded with complacency her nephew's tall figure, silhouetted against the flare of the musicians' torches. "I am afraid," said Alayne, "that Meg hated me very much after our quarrel about Pheasant. I know that she thought my attitude toward her positively indecent. My dear, Meg is a narrow-minded Victorian. So are my brothers, though earnest gentleness gives them the appearance of broad-mindedness. You and I are moderns, you by birth, and I by the progression of an open mind. I shall be very sorry to see you go tomorrow. I have grown very fond of you." "Thank you, and I have of you, of most of you. There are so many things I shall miss." I know, my dear. You must come back to visit us. I shall not leave Jalna while Mamma lives, though Nicholas would certainly like to see me depart. Yes, you must visit us." "I'm afraid not. You must come to see me in New York. My aunts would be delighted to meet you." Augusta whispered, "What do they know about Eden and you?" "Only that we have separated, and that I am going back to my old work." "Sensible, very. The less one's relatives know of one's life, the better. I had no peace in my married life till the ocean rolled between me and my people. Dear me, Rennie's lighting the bonfire. I hope it's quite safe. I wonder if you would mind, Alayne, going down and asking him to be very careful. A spark from it smouldering on the roof, and we might be burned in our beds tonight. As Alayne moved slowly down the lawn, the first sparkle curled about the base of the pyramid of hardwood sticks that had as their foundation a great chunk of resinous pine. A column of smoke arose, steady and dense, and then was dispersed by the sudden and furious blossoming of flowers of flame. In an instant, the entire scene was changed. The ravine lay, a cavernous gulf of blackness, while the branches of the nearby trees were flung out in fierce metallic grandeur. The torches in the summer house became mere flickering sparks. The stars were blown out like birthday candles. The figures of the young men moving about the bonfire became heroic. Their monstrous shadows strove together upon the rich tapestry of the evergreens. The air was full of music, of voices, of the crackling of flames. Out of the shadow thrown by a chestnut tree in bloom, Pheasant ran across the grass to Alayne's side. She seemed to have grown during those weeks of her imprisonment. Her dress looked too short for her. Her movements had the wistful energy of those of a growing child. Her hair, uncut for some time, curved in a quaint little tail at her nape. "This freedom is wonderful," she breathed, "and all that pretty firelight, and the fiddles. Try as I will, Alayne, I can't help feeling happy tonight." "Why should you try not to be happy? You must be happy as a bird, Pheasant. I'm so glad we had that hour together this morning. You've been beautiful to me, Alayne. No one in the world has ever been so good to me. Those little notes you slipped under my door." Alayne took her hand. "Come, I am to go and tell Renny to be careful. Aunt Augusta is afraid we shall be burned in our beds." The three youngest of the Whiteoaks were in a group together. As the girls approached, Finch turned his back on them and skulked into the shadow, but Wakefield ran to meet them and put an arm about the waist of each. "Come, my girls," he said airily. "Join the merry circle. Let's take hands and dance around the bonfire. If only we could get Granny to dance too. Please, let's dance." He tugged at their hands. "Pierce, take Pheasant's other hand. Renny, take Alayne's hand. We're going to dance." Alayne felt her hand being taken into Rennie's. Wakefield's exuberance was not transmittable, but he ran hither and thither, exhorting the guests to dance, till at last he did get a circle together on the lawn for Sir Roger de Coverley. But it was the elders who were moved to disport themselves, after a glass or two of punch from the silver bowl on the porch. The younger ones hung back in the shelter of the blazing pile, entangled in the web of emotions which they had woven about themselves. Eden was not among them, but the vision of his fair face, with its smiling lips, mocked each in turn. To Renny it said, "I have shown you a girl at last whom you can continue to love without possessing, with no hope of possessing, who will haunt you all your days." To Alayne, "I have made you experience in a few months love, passion, despair, shame enough for a lifetime. Now go back to your sterile work and see if you can forget." To Pierce, "You sneered at me for a poet. Do you acknowledge that I am a better lover than you?" To Pheasant, "I have poisoned your life." To Finch, hiding in the darkness, "I have flung you head first into the horrors of awakening." Renny and Alayne, their fingers still locked, stood looking upward at the flame-colored smoke that rose toward the sky in billows, endlessly pursuing each other, while, after the crashing of a log, a shower of sparks sprang upward like a swarm of fireflies. In the glare, their faces were transfigured to a strange beauty, yet this beauty was lost, not registered on any consciousness, for they dared not look at each other. "I have been watching two of those sparks," she said, "sparks that flew up, and then together, and then apart again, till out of sight, like us." "I won't have it so, not till out of sight, extinguished, if you mean that. No, I am not hopeless. There's something for us besides separation. You couldn't believe that we'll never meet again, could you?" "Oh, we may meet again. That is, if you ever come to New York. By that time your feelings may have changed." "Changed? Alayne, why should you want to spoil our last moments together by suggesting that?" "I suppose, being a woman, I just wanted to hear you deny it. You've no idea what it is to be a woman. I used to think in my own life that we were equal, men and women, Since I've lived at Jalna, it seems to me that women are only slaves." Someone had thrown an armful of brushwood on the fire. For a space it died down to a subdued but threatening crackle. In the dimness they turned to each other. "Slaves," he repeated. "Not to us." "Well, to the life you create, to the passions you arouse in us. Oh, you don't know what it is to be a woman. I tell you it's nothing less than horrible. Look at Meg and Pheasant and me." She caught the glint of a smile. He said, "Look at Maurice and Pierce and me." "It's not the same. It's not the same. You have your land, your horses, your interests that absorb almost all your waking hours."
"What about our dreams?"
"Dreams are nothing. It's reality that tortures women. Think of Meg, hiding in that awful cabin. Pheasant, locked in her room. Me, grinding away in an office."
"I can't," he answered hesitatingly. "I can't put myself in your place. I suppose it's awful. But never think we don't know a hell more torturing."
"You do. You do. But when you are tired of being tortured, you leave your hell, go out and shut the door behind you, while we only heap on more fuel."
"My darling," his arms were about her. "Don't talk like that." He kissed her quickly, hotly. "There, I said I wouldn't kiss you again, but I have, just for goodbye." She felt that she was sinking, fainting in his arms. A swirl of smoke, perfumed by pine boughs, enveloped them. A rushing, panting sound came from the heart of the fire. The violins sang together.
"Again," she breathed, clinging to him. "Again."
"No," he said through his teeth. "Not again." He put her from him and went to the other side of the bonfire, which now blazed forth once more. He stood among his brothers, taller than they, his hair red in the firelight, his carved face set and pale. Recovering herself, she looked across at him, thinking that she would like to remember him so. In a pool of serene radiance, grandmother sat. A black velvet cloak, lined with crimson silk, had been thrown about her shoulders. Her hands, glittering with rings, rested on the top of her gold-headed ebony stick. Boney, chained to his perch, had been brought out to the terrace at her command, that he might bask in the light of the birthday conflagration. But his head was under his wing. He slept and paid no heed to lights or music. She was very tired. The figures moving about the lawn looked like gyrating, gesticulating puppets. The jigging of the fiddles, the moaning of the flute, beat down upon her, dazed her. She was sinking lower and lower in her chair. Nobody looked at her. 100 years old. She was frightened suddenly by the stupendousness of her achievement. The plumes of the bonfire were drooping. The sky loomed black above. Beneath her, the solid earth, which had borne her up so long, swayed with her, as though it would like to throw her off into space. She blinked. She fumbled for something, she knew not what. She was frightened. She made a gurgling sound. She heard Ernest's voice say, "Mama, must you do that?" She gathered her wits about her. "Somebody," she said thickly, "somebody kiss me, quick." They looked at her kindly, hesitated to determine which should deliver the required caress. Then from their midst, Pheasant darted forth, flung herself before the old lady, and lifted up her child's face. Grandmother peered, grinning, to see which of them it was. Then, recognizing Pheasant, she clasped the girl to her breast. From that hug, she gathered new vitality. Her arms grew strong. She pressed Pheasant's young body to her and planted warm kisses on her face. "Ha!" she murmured. "That's good." And again, "Ha!" The end. End of Jalna by Mazo de la Roche.